Chapter 1: The Concrete Heart. The facility had no name. On the classified government maps, it was a black square designated only by a string of numbers, 077P8. To the few dozen souls who worked within its walls, it was the pen. To the things locked inside, it was the end of the world. Leo Jansen drove toward it as the sun bled out across the barren western plains. The road was a single strip of cracked asphalt, a lonely scar on an immense, empty landscape. For the last hour he had seen no other cars, no signs of life beyond the skeletal remains of yucca plants clawing at the dust. The recruitment pamphlet had promised a career with purpose. It had shown smiling men in crisp gray uniforms, a state-of-the-art institution. It had lied. The pen did not rise from the earth so much as it oppressed it. It was a brutalist masterpiece of poured concrete and oxidized steel, a squat, windowless ziggurat designed to contain and crush. There were no graceful towers, no architectural flourishes. It was a monument to function, and its function was to be a tomb for things that could not die. Leo parked his worn sedan in the designated staff lot, a lonely island of vehicles surrounded by a triple line of electrified fencing, topped with coils of serrated wire. The air itself seemed different here, thin and charged with a low hum that vibrated up through the soles of his boots. It was the sound of colossal amounts of power being drawn from the grid to fuel the containment fields. He slung his duffel bag over his shoulder and walked toward the staff entrance, a single steel door set into a concrete wall 30 feet high. A camera mounted in a reinforced housing swiveled to track his approach. A harsh, metallic voice crackled from a speaker grill. "State your name and designation." Leo Jansen, new corrections officer, first day. A moment of silence, filled only by the hum and the whisper of the wind across the plains. A heavy series of clicks and groans echoed from within the wall, and the door slid sideways with a shudder. The air that washed out was cold and sterile, smelling of ozone, industrial cleaner, and a faint, metallic tang he couldn't place. He would later learn it was the smell of fear, old and saturated into the very concrete. The woman who met him inside was built like the facility itself, solid, functional, and without a single soft edge. Her name tag read Hom. Her gray uniform was immaculate, her boots polished to a dull shine. Her face was a mask of professional severity, her eyes missing any trace of warmth. "Jansen, you're 5 minutes early. Good. Punctuality is a structural requirement here, not a virtue." She didn't offer a hand, she just turned on her heel. "Follow me, we'll get you processed." Processing was a cold, efficient violation. He surrendered his civilian clothes, his wallet, his phone, his watch. He was given a standard-issue gray uniform, identical to Hom's, along with a heavy utility belt. The belt held a multi-tool, a high-intensity flashlight, a bulky radio, and a magnetic keycard. There was no firearm. "Guns are a liability," Hom explained, her voice flat as she led him through a series of sterile corridors. The walls were bare concrete, the floors polished to a mirror finish. The only color came from thin lines painted on the floor, red, blue, yellow, green. They snaked through the facility, converging and diverging at intersections. "Most of our residents don't care about bullets. Worse, some of them can use the metal. You get into trouble, you use this. She tapped a small, sealed pouch on her own belt. Last resort. It's a silver nitrate and consecrated iron compound. It'll buy you a few seconds. It will not save you. Your job is to observe, report, and never, ever open a door without authorization. Clear. Crystal, Leo managed, his own voice sounding thin in the oppressive quiet. We'll start with the tour. Stay on the green line. Deviate and the automated defenses will put you down. They don't ask questions. The tour was a journey into a modern-day bestiary. Ham led him through corridors that grew progressively colder and dimmer. The air grew thick with unspoken menace. They walked along elevated catwalks, looking down into the various blocks. Each block was a unique architectural nightmare, tailored to its occupants. Block G, she called the Howler's Den. It was a circular panopticon with cells whose walls were layered with sound-dampening foam and lead. The air thrummed with a low, guttural growling that seeped through the insulation, a predator's rumble that vibrated in Leo's teeth. The Magnar Pack, Ham said, her voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through the noise. Lycanthropes. Full moon protocols are a nightmare. You don't speak to them. You don't make eye contact. You walk your circuit, you check the seals, you move on. Block C was the aviary, a vast, open space crisscrossed with catwalks and nets. It housed winged things. Leo caught a glimpse of something leathery and gargoyle-like perched high on a steel beam, its eyes glowing with faint red light before it tucked its head beneath a wing. Block F was the quiet wing. The cells were solid cubes of polished black marble, featureless save for a narrow slit at the bottom for a food tray. Psychics, memetics, info hazards, Ham stated. The weeping woman is in F7. Her cell is a vacuum. We had a breach 2 years ago. An officer heard her. We found him in a puddle. You hear anything that sounds like a woman crying on this level, you hit the silent alarm and you run. Leo felt a cold sweat prickle the back of his neck. The smiling faces from the recruitment pamphlet seemed like a sick joke. This wasn't a prison. It was a vault for nightmares. He saw an old woman sitting in a rocking chair in a brightly lit cell, knitting with her bare hands. She seemed harmless, a grandmotherly figure. "That's Grandma Stitch," Ham said, her tone devoid of irony. "She can unravel a person like a cheap sweater. Keep your distance." In another wing, a figure stood perfectly still in the center of its cell. It was tall and unnaturally thin, wrapped in gray rags. Its face was a blank expanse of skin. "The echo," Ham supplied, "projects your worst failure into your head, makes you live it again and again. We lost a guard to suicide last year. Stood right where you are, stared too long, smashed his own head against the railing until he stopped moving." Leo swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. He forced himself to look away, to focus on the green line beneath his feet. It felt like the only sane thing in this whole concrete hell. Finally, they reached the administrative nexus, a stark contrast to the grim functionality of the cell blocks. The floors were carpeted, the lighting was warm, and the air didn't taste of dread. A large, mahogany desk sat before a plate-glass window that looked out not onto the plains, but into the prison's central command center. A wall of monitors displayed silent, black and white feeds from every corner of the facility. A man stood before the window, his back to them. He was tall, dressed in a tailored suit that seemed out of place. He turned, and a practiced, confident smile spread across his face. This had to be the warden. "Ah, Officer Jansen, welcome to the pen." His voice was smooth, cultured. It was the voice of a man used to being in charge. "I am Warden Marcus Vance. I trust Officer Hom has given you the introductory sermon on discipline and survival." "Something like that, sir," Leo said. "Good." Vance gestured to the wall of monitors. His eyes shone with a proprietor's pride. "Look at it, officer. A marvel of engineering and metaphysical science. The most secure correctional facility on the planet. We are the wall that stands between the light and the things that want to extinguish it. We are the keepers of the dark." He seemed to be reciting lines from a speech he had given many times. He walked over to a specific monitor. The camera showed a man sitting on a simple cot in a Spartan cell. He was older, with long, gray hair and an air of immense patience. He was reading a book. "See that one?" Vance said. "That's Gavril, a vampire 15th century. He once turned the entire populace of a Romanian principality into his personal livestock. Here, he reads Tolstoy and plays chess by mail. We have contained a force of nature, Jansen. We have civilized a monster." Vance's smile widened. "And our reputation for excellence has been recognized. I have just received confirmation from the highest levels. We have been chosen to house an asset of unprecedented significance, a new arrival." Hom stiffened. It was a subtle movement, a slight tightening of her shoulders, but Leo saw it. "Sir," Hom's voice was tight, "we weren't scheduled for any new transfers this quarter. This is a special case, Lena, a matter of global security." Vance seemed to relish the moment, the drama of it. He turned his gaze from the monitors to Leo, his eyes alight with a zealous fire. "Tomorrow, at 800, we will be receiving a new resident. Its designation is Subject 0. Prepare the Aegis cell in Block Z." Hom's face, usually a stony mask, paled slightly. "Sir, Block Z is sealed. The Aegis cell. Its containment protocols are not fully tested. We don't have the personnel trained for." "Then we will test them, and we will train them," Vance cut her off, his voice hardening, the smooth veneer cracking to reveal the steel beneath. "This is an opportunity, Officer Hom. A chance to prove that our facility, is capable of holding not just monsters but miracles of terror. I want full lockdown protocols in effect 1 hour prior to arrival. I want your best teams on the transfer detail. No mistakes." He turned his attention back to Leo. "You, Jansen, you'll be on the observation detail for the transfer. A baptism by fire. It will be an educational experience." The warden's confident smile returned, but it didn't reach his eyes. Leo looked from Vance's triumphant face to Hom's grim, worried expression. The name echoed in the quiet of the office. Subject 0. It sounded less like a designation and more like an ending. His first shift wasn't even over, and he already understood the prison's most fundamental truth. The real monsters weren't all locked in the cells. Chapter 2: The Shape of Absence. The morning of the transfer, a palpable tension settled over the pen. It was a physical thing, a pressure in the air that hummed alongside the containment fields. The usual cacophony of the facility was gone. The howlers in Block G were silent, their guttural growls replaced by an uneasy quiet. The chattering and shrieks from the aviary ceased. It was as if every creature in the prison, from the dumbest brute to the most ancient intelligence, was holding its breath. Leo stood at his assigned post, a catwalk overlooking the main sally port. He had spent a sleepless night in the sterile staff barracks, the warden's words replaying in his mind. A baptism by fire. Below him, Officer Hom was directing a team of 8 guards, the pen's elite special containment unit. They wore heavy, graphite-colored armor and carried bulky devices that looked like a cross between a fire extinguisher and a particle accelerator. They moved with a grim, practiced efficiency, but Leo could see the strain in their movements, the tightness around their eyes. Warden Vance observed from the command center, a remote figure behind reinforced glass, his posture rigid with anticipation. He wanted this to be a triumph. Leo could see it in the way he held his shoulders. At 7:55, the outer gates groaned open. The vehicle that entered was not a standard prison transport. It was a massive, matte black truck with no windows and no visible markings. It looked less like a vehicle and more like a mobile vault. It rolled into the sally port with a low, electric whine, the heavy gates sealing behind it with a deafening clang that echoed through the sudden silence. The truck came to a stop directly under Leo's position. The air grew cold. "On my mark," Hom's voice crackled over the radio in Leo's ear. "Containment fields to full power. Engage resonance dampeners." A series of loud clicks and a deep, resonant thrum shook the catwalk. The lights flickered, and the air shimmered as if they were looking through a heat haze. "Fields active," a voice responded. "We are green." The rear of the truck unfolded like some obscene metal flower, revealing a ramp. 2 figures in bulky, silver containment suits, the kind used for hazardous material spills, walked down the ramp. They moved with a slow, deliberate caution. Between them, they guided a levitating platform. On the platform was a cube. It was roughly 10 feet on each side, made of a material that seemed to drink the light. It wasn't black. It was an absence of color, a hole in the world. There were no visible seams, no controls. As it moved into the sally port, Leo felt a strange sensation, a wave of vertigo mixed with a profound sense of dislocation. He gripped the railing, his knuckles white. For a moment, he thought he was standing on the ceiling, looking down at his own body. He blinked, shaking his head, and the sensation passed, leaving a nauseating residue. He wasn't the only one affected. Below, one of the SCU guards stumbled, catching himself before he fell. Hom shot him a sharp look. "Steady," she commanded over the comms, her voice a lifeline of authority in the growing strangeness. "Bring it to the Aegis Transit Corridor." The 2 figures in silver suits guided the cube toward a massive, circular blast door at the far end of the sally port. As it passed beneath the cell blocks, a wave of unrest finally broke the silence. A single, desperate howl erupted from the howler's den, not a sound of aggression, but of pure, abject terror. It was cut off abruptly. From Block F, a low, keening moan began, and the lights in that sector flickered and died. "Report," Hom snapped. "F Block is dark. We've got a power fluctuation. It's the weeping woman, she's. The voice on the radio cut out, replaced by a burst of static. Ignore it, Warden Vance's voice cut in, cold and sharp. Containment is the priority. Get Subject Zero to the Aegis cell, now. The team moved with renewed urgency, pushing the floating cube into the corridor beyond the blast door. Leo was ordered to follow, his boots clanging on the metal catwalk that ran parallel to the corridor's floor. The corridor was 100 yards long, a sterile white tunnel leading to another, even more formidable door. This was the entrance to Block Z, the block that was never used, the block that made even a veteran like Ham nervous. As they moved down the corridor, the strange effects intensified. Leo saw the walls seem to bend inwards, the floor ripple like water. He glanced at his own hands on the railing, and for a split second, he saw the withered, liver-spotted hands of an old man. He snatched them away, his heart hammering against his ribs. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and something else, something like burnt sugar and old film. The cube reached the final door. It was a complex iris of interlocking metal shards, covered in glowing runes that pulsed with a soft, blue light. Dr. Anishi, the facility's occult specialist, was there, chanting in a low, monotonous language as he traced the runes with a gloved hand. "The warding is holding," Anishi said, sweat beading on his forehead. "But the pressure is immense. It's hungry. It's pushing against the metaphysics of the building." The iris spiraled open, revealing the Aegis cell. It was not a cell, but a chamber. A perfect sphere of polished obsidian suspended in the center of a vast, cubical room by a web of energy beams. The floating platform carried the smaller cube into the chamber, positioning it directly before the sphere. "Prepare for transfer," Ham ordered. One of the silver-suited figures produced a device and pointed it at the cube. There was no sound, no flash of light, but a single, hairline seam appeared on the cube's surface. It split open, the two halves falling away. There was nothing inside. For a moment, everyone stared at the empty space. Confusion rippled through the guards. "Where is it?" one of them muttered. "It's not empty," Dr. Anishi breathed, his eyes wide with a horrified awe. He was staring at the space where the cube's contents should be. "Don't you see it?" Leo strained his eyes, trying to comprehend what he was looking at. It wasn't an empty space. It was a pocket of absolute nothing. It was a shape, vaguely humanoid, but it had no substance. It was defined only by what it was not. Light did not reflect off it, it bent around it, creating a distorted, warped silhouette. Sound did not echo near it, it was consumed. It was a three-dimensional shadow, a figure carved from pure absence. This was Kine, Subject Zero. The shape of absence drifted from the platform and toward the obsidian sphere. As it did, the humming of the facility pitched higher into a painful shriek. The light strobed violently. Leo felt a sharp pain behind his eyes, and a memory that wasn't his flooded his mind. A young boy himself, hiding in a closet, the wood smelling of cedar, listening to his parents shouting. The memory was so vivid, so real, he could almost taste the dust in the air. He stumbled, catching himself again. The shape entered the sphere. The instant it was fully inside, the iris door slammed shut with a deafening boom. The shrieking sound cut off. The light stabilized. The oppressive pressure in the air vanished, replaced by an unnerving, profound silence. For a long moment, nobody moved. They just stared at the sealed door of Block Z. "Containment successful," Warden Vance announced over the comms, his voice thick with triumph. "Phase 1 is complete. Well done, team." The SCU guards visibly relaxed, a collective sigh of relief passing through them. But Ham and Dr. Anishi did not relax. Anishi was staring at the door, his face pale. "Warden," Anishi said, his voice trembling slightly, "the readings are wrong. It's not resisting the containment field, it's integrating with it. It's feeding on the energy." "Nonsense, Doctor," Vance replied smoothly. "Your sensors are probably malfunctioning from the energy spike. The asset is secure. That is all that matters. Ham, pull your team out. Jansen, you're on first watch. 4 hours. Log any and all anomalies, no matter how minor." The order felt like a death sentence. Ham gave Leo a long, hard look, an expression that was almost pity. Then she turned and led her exhausted team away, their armored boots echoing down the long, white corridor, leaving Leo alone in the silence. He stood on the catwalk, staring at the sealed door of Block Z. The only sounds were the quiet hum of the lights and the distant, rhythmic thumping of his own heart. He pulled out his logbook. Time, 8:27. Status, Subject 0 contained. All quiet. He wrote the words, but he didn't believe them. He felt a creeping dread, a certainty that they hadn't locked something in. They had locked themselves in with it. He looked down at his hands. They were his own again, young and steady. But the memory of the old man's hands, the memory of the closet, they lingered. New data filed away in his brain, a seed planted in the dark. He began his patrol, a slow, lonely walk back and forth along the 100-yard catwalk. 40 minutes passed. Nothing happened. The silence remained absolute. He was beginning to think Vance was right, that the strange phenomena were just temporary side effects of the transfer. Then he saw it. At the far end of the corridor near the Sally Port entrance, a single panel of the wall flickered. It became translucent for a bare second, and through it, Leo saw not the concrete and steel of the adjoining block but a star-filled sky. An impossible alien sky, with swirling nebulae of colors he had never seen. He blinked and it was gone. The wall was solid concrete again. He froze, his breath catching in his throat. He raised his radio, his hand shaking. "Command, this is Jansen. I have an anomaly to report." There was no response, only static, a deep, rushing static like an ocean roaring in his ear. And somewhere deep within the static he thought he could hear a woman quietly weeping. Chapter 3: Whispers in the Static. The static in Leo's ear was a physical presence. It was not the clean hiss of an empty channel but a thick, syrupy sound, filled with hidden textures and faint, dragging undertones. It felt heavy, like the pressure of deep water. He tapped the side of his radio, a useless, reflexive gesture. "Command, do you copy? This is Jansen in the Block Z corridor. Repeat, I have an anomaly to report." More static. He switched channels, cycling through the encrypted frequencies. Each one was the same, a dead-end wall of noise. The weeping sound was gone, leaving only the sound of a rushing void. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of his composure. He was cut off, alone in a white tunnel with a sealed door at one end and a universe of nightmares at the other. He abandoned the radio and ran. His boots hammered a frantic rhythm on the catwalk, the sound shockingly loud in the profound quiet. He didn't stop until he reached the Sally Port door, slamming his hand against the cold steel. It didn't budge. He fumbled for his keycard, his fingers clumsy, and swiped it at the panel. The light on the reader remained red. Access denied. He tried again. Red. He slammed his fist against the door. Vance opened the door. His voice was swallowed by the corridor. He was trapped. A new protocol, perhaps, sealing the observation officer in with the new asset for a quarantine period. The thought was chilling, but it was a structured, procedural kind of fear. It was a rule, and rules could be understood. What he had seen, the glimpse of that impossible, star-dusted sky, was something else entirely. That was a violation of reality itself. He forced himself to calm down, his breath fogging in the cold air. Panicking would get him killed. That was one of the first things Ham had drilled into him. He took a steadying breath and turned slowly to survey his prison. The corridor was exactly as it had been, 100 yards of sterile white, illuminated by humming fluorescent lights. At the far end, the iris door to Block Z remained sealed, a silent, inscrutable eye. The wall panel that had flickered was solid. He walked towards it, his footsteps now hesitant, cautious. He ran his hand over the smooth, cold concrete. It was real, solid. There was no trace of the stellar anomaly. Was it a hallucination? A psychic echo from one of the Block F residents amplified by the new arrival? The echo could make you see things, Ham had said. Or maybe it was this kind, this Subject Zero, testing its cage, testing him. He decided to follow his orders. Log any and all anomalies. He took out his logbook and a pen, his hand still not entirely steady. Time 9:14. Radio communication lost. All channels unresponsive. Sally Port door sealed. Requesting confirmation if this is a quarantine protocol. Anomaly report. Visual distortion on corridor wall. Panel 7C appeared translucent, showing what looked like deep space. Duration approximately 1 second. Writing it down made it feel both more real and more absurd. He felt a fool, but he also felt a chilling certainty that he was not imagining it. He clicked his pen shut and resumed his patrol, his senses now screamingly alert. He watched the walls, the floor, the ceiling, searching for any other flicker of unreality. For another hour there was nothing. The only sound was the hum of the lights and the soft scuff of his own boots. The silence began to work on him, pressing in, making him feel terribly small and exposed. He found himself thinking about Gavril, the ancient vampire in his cell, reading Tolst. What did a creature like that think of this new arrival? Did it feel the same suffocating dread that was beginning to coil in Leo's own gut? Gavril was a monster, but he was a known quantity. He had desires, weaknesses. He drank blood. He could be killed with sunlight and wood. He existed within a framework of rules, however bizarre. This kind. It felt like it was erasing the rule book. A new sound broke the silence, a soft, rhythmic clicking. Leo froze mid-step, straining to hear. The sound was coming from inside Block Z, from behind the sealed door. Click, click, click. It was a slow, deliberate sound, like a metronome, or a clock. He crept closer to the iris door, his ear near the cold metal. The sound was clearer now. It wasn't mechanical. It had a wet, organic quality to it. Click, clack, click. He backed away slowly. Another anomaly to log. He was beginning to think his logbook would be full before his shift ended, if it ever ended. He was halfway down the corridor when he saw him. Standing near the sealed Sally port door, his back to Leo, was a man in a standard gray corrections officer uniform. Relief washed over Leo in a dizzying wave. "Hey," he called out, his voice hoarse. "Is your radio working? Mine's dead." The figure didn't turn. He remained perfectly still. "Hello," Leo said, walking closer. "Are you all right?" As he got nearer, he noticed things were wrong. The man's posture was too rigid, his shoulders unnaturally square. And though he was the same height as an average man, he seemed to cast no shadow despite the bright lights of the corridor. A cold knot of dread tightened in Leo's stomach. He slowed his approach. "I'm Officer Jansen," Leo said, keeping his distance. "Who are you? I didn't see you come in." The figure slowly, deliberately turned its head. The movement was jerky, unnatural, like a poorly operated marionette. It turned its head 180 degrees, its chin coming to rest on its spine. The face that looked at Leo was his own. It was a perfect copy, down to the small scar on his chin from a childhood fall. But the eyes were wrong. They were flat, black pools devoid of light or recognition. It was a predator's gaze, cold and appraising. The thing wearing his face smiled, a slow stretching of lips that did not reach the dead eyes. "Is your radio working?" it asked. Its voice was a perfect mimicry of his own, but flat, without inflection. A recording. "Mine's dead." Leo stumbled backward, a strangled cry catching in his throat. His hand went to the pouch on his belt, the last resort Ham had told him about. The thing took a step toward him, its head still swiveled at that impossible angle. Its feet did not lift from the floor. They seemed to glide, a silent, frictionless movement. "Who are you?" it asked, its voice still a dead echo of his own. "I didn't see you come in." Leo ripped the pouch from his belt. It was sealed with a tamper-proof strip. His fingers fumbled with it, his mind screaming. The doppelganger was closing the distance, its movements becoming faster, smoother. It was learning. He tore the pouch open. Inside was a small, heavy ball wrapped in oilcloth. He hurled it. The ball struck the creature in the chest. It exploded in a shower of glittering, silvery dust and black powder. A harsh, sizzling sound filled the air, like water hitting a hot griddle. The thing shrieked, a sound that was not a copy of Leo's voice. It was a high-frequency tear in the fabric of the air, a sound of static and agony. The creature convulsed, its form flickering. For a moment it was Leo, then a gray-uniformed guard he didn't recognize, then a woman in a lab coat who looked like Dr. Anishi. Its form destabilized, its features melting and running like wax. It stumbled backward, its stolen face contorting in a rictus of pain, the silver and iron compound eating into its form. It collapsed into itself, folding inward until it was a small, twitching pile of gray fabric on the floor. The fabric smoked, then dissolved into a greasy black stain that quickly evaporated, leaving nothing behind. Leo was on the floor, his back pressed against the cold wall, gasping for air. His heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of his chest. He stared at the empty space where the creature had been. It wasn't a hallucination. It had been real. He had touched it in a way. He had unmade it. Slowly, shakily, he got to his feet. He looked at his own hands, half expecting them to be someone else's. They were his. They were trembling violently. He didn't know what that thing was. A mimic, a projection from Kind's cell, had it gotten out. The clicking sound from behind the Block Z door stopped. The silence that replaced it was somehow worse, heavier. It was a listening silence. A new sound reached him. This one was real, familiar. A loud series of clicks and groans from the Sally Port door. He spun around, his eyes wide. The red light on the keycard reader had turned green. The massive door was sliding open. Officer Hom stood in the doorway, flanked by two SCU guards in their heavy armor. Her face was grim, her hand resting on the sidearm she wasn't supposed to have. "Jansen," she barked. "Report. What the hell is going on in here? The entire Block comm system went down." Leo just stared at her, his mind struggling to form words. He pointed a trembling finger at the empty spot on the floor. There was something, it looked like me. I used the... Hom's eyes darted to the empty pouch on his belt, then to the floor. She saw the faint, disappearing stain. Her expression hardened. "Fall in," she ordered, her voice tight. "We're going to see the warden." As he stumbled out of the white corridor, he looked back one last time at the sealed iris door of Block Z. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. He knew, with a certainty that went deeper than logic, that the thing he had just fought was not an escapee. It was a feeler, a probe, a question asked by the silent, thinking absence they had locked away in the heart of the prison. And he had a terrible feeling it hadn't liked his answer. Chapter 4: The Logic of Contagion. Warden Vance's office felt like a different world. The thick carpet absorbed all sound. The wood-paneled walls exuded a false sense of warmth and civility. It was a bubble of control, and Vance sat at its center behind his mahogany desk, a fortress of calm against the chaos he had invited into his facility. He listened to Leo's report without interruption, his fingers steepled before him, his expression unreadable. Hom stood near the door, her arms crossed, her face a thundercloud. When Leo finished, his voice raw, Vance was silent for a long moment. He didn't look at Leo. He stared at the wall of monitors, at the silent, gray images of his contained kingdom. "A doppelganger," Vance said, his voice a soft murmur. "Fascinating. A psychomorphic projection, most likely. A manifestation of the observer's own identity. A defensive reflex." "It tried to kill him," Hom snapped, her patience clearly gone. "That's not a reflex, Warden, that's an attack." "Semantics, Lena," Vance replied, waving a dismissive hand. "The important thing is that the asset remains contained. The Aegis cell is holding. The primary objective is secure." The comms for an entire sector went down. The power grid is fluctuating. We had an unconfirmed event in F Block, and Officer Jansen was assaulted by an entity that, by all accounts, was generated by your new asset. Hom's voice was low and dangerous. "This is not secure. This is the beginning of a systemic failure. Leo watched the exchange, feeling like a ghost in the room. They were talking about him, about what happened to him, as if he were a piece of damaged equipment. Vance's casual dismissal of the horror he had just faced was more chilling than the mimic itself. "The facility is adjusting," Vance insisted, his voice taking on a professorial tone. "We have introduced an unprecedented variable into a complex ecosystem. There will be ripples. The entity in Jansen's report was neutralized by standard countermeasures. The system worked. Officer Jansen did his job. He deserves a commendation and a sedative." He finally looked at Leo, his eyes cool and analytical. "You've had a difficult first shift, son. Go to the infirmary. Dr. Anishi will see to you. Get some rest. You've earned it." It was a dismissal. Leo looked at Ham, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "Don't argue." He nodded numbly, turned, and left the office. The heavy door clicked shut behind him, sealing him off from the argument that he knew was continuing inside. The infirmary was as sterile as the rest of the facility, a white, brightly lit space that smelled of antiseptic. Dr. Anishi was waiting for him. He was a small, precise man with an insatiable curiosity that burned in his eyes. He checked Leo's vitals, his touch clinical and detached. "An ectoplasmic manifestation with mimetic properties," Anishi mused as he wrapped a blood pressure cuff around Leo's arm. "Remarkable. Did it have mass? When you threw the compound, did you feel an impact?" I think so," Leo said, his mind still struggling to process the events. "And the dissolution? Was there any residual particulate, any scent?" "Burnt, something like old plastic." "Fascinating." Anishi made a note on a data pad. "The entity in Block Z, Kine. It's not just a presence. It's a localized ontological event. It's rewriting the rules of its immediate environment. The mimic was likely a byproduct of this, a splinter of its consciousness testing the boundaries. You're lucky you had the iron compound. Standard kinetic force would likely have passed right through it." Anishi prepared a syringe. "The warden ordered a sedative to help you rest. There's been a lot of psychic turbulence today. It can affect the nerves." Leo looked at the needle, then at the doctor's eager, obsessive face. He didn't want a sedative. He didn't want to sleep. To sleep was to be defenseless, and he felt as though the entire prison was watching him, waiting for him to close his eyes. "I'm fine, doctor. Just a little shaken up." "The warden's orders," Anishi said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "It's for your own good. We need our officers calm and rational." Before Leo could protest further, the needle was in his arm. A cold sensation spread up his vein. Anishi guided him to a cot in a small, private observation room. "Rest now, Officer Jansen. We'll monitor you." The door hissed shut and a soft lock clicked into place. He was in a cell. A comfortable cell, but a cell nonetheless. The sedative worked fast. His limbs grew heavy, the sharp edges of his fear blurring into a thick, syrupy fog. The room began to spin slowly. As his consciousness faded, he stared at the featureless white ceiling. The last thing he saw before the darkness took him was a flicker. A single, hairline crack of absolute blackness spreading across the ceiling, like a spider web made of night. He dreamed. He was not in the pen, but in a vast, empty library. The shelves were infinitely tall, filled with books bound in gray, featureless leather. He was the only person there. He walked for what felt like miles, the silence broken only by the sound of his own footsteps. He pulled a book from a shelf. Its pages were blank. He pulled another. Blank. They were all blank. Then he heard the clicking. Click, clack, click. It was the same sound he had heard from behind the Block Z door. He turned and saw a figure at the far end of the aisle, sitting at a solitary reading desk. It was Gavril, the ancient vampire. He wasn't reading. He was playing a game of chess against himself, his long, pale fingers moving the pieces with meticulous care. Leo walked toward him. Gavril did not look up. "They brought the end in a box," Gavril said, his voice a dry rustle of dead leaves. He moved a black knight. "The warden thinks he has captured it. He has only invited it to feed." "Feed on what?" Leo asked in the dream. Gavril finally looked up. His eyes were not human. They were old, ancient, filled with a terrible, weary knowledge. On patterns, on rules, on the logic that holds things together. It is a contagion of the mind, young guard. It finds a crack and it seeps in. He gestured to the infinite shelves of blank books. "It has already started. It is unwriting the story." The clicking sound grew louder, closer. It wasn't coming from Gavril. It was coming from all around them. Leo looked at the books again. The blank pages were no longer blank. A single, complex pattern was appearing on them, drawn in ink the color of dried blood. It was a sprawling, mesmerizing sigil, a map of madness. "What is that?" Leo breathed. "The new story," Gavril whispered, a flicker of something that might have been fear in his ancient eyes. "And we are all its characters now." Leo woke with a jolt, his heart pounding. The infirmary room was dark. The sedative had worn off. He sat up, his uniform stuck to his skin with cold sweat. He didn't know how long he had slept. Hours at least. The dream clung to him, vivid and terrifying. A contagion of the mind. He got up and went to the door. As he expected, it was locked. He looked through the small, reinforced window in the door. The main infirmary was dark, running on emergency lighting. It was empty. A low, rhythmic banging sound echoed from somewhere down the corridor. It was a heavy, metallic sound. Someone trying to break down a door. He looked around his small room. There was the cot, a sink, a toilet. Nothing he could use as a weapon or a tool. He was trapped again. He pressed his face against the cool glass of the window, trying to see further down the dark corridor. The banging stopped. The silence that followed was worse. Then he saw movement. A figure shuffled out of the shadows. It was a guard, his uniform torn, his head lolling at a strange angle. He was dragging one foot behind him. He stopped under one of the few working emergency lights. His skin was pale, waxy. A thin, dark line of blood trickled from his nose. His eyes were wide open, but they were milky and unfocused. He was staring at the wall, his head cocked as if listening to something Leo couldn't hear. Slowly, the guard raised his hand and began to trace a pattern on the wall with his finger. A complex, sprawling pattern. It was the same sigil from the blank books in his dream. A second figure emerged from the darkness. Another guard moving with the same shambling, unnatural gait. He joined the first, his finger tracing the same mad pattern over the first guard's lines. Then a third appeared, a medical orderly, his movements just as jerky, his eyes just as blank. They were like insects following some unseen, unheard command, building a nest or a gateway. Leo backed away from the door, his breath held tight in his chest. The contagion was spreading. It wasn't just rewriting the rules of physics, it was rewriting the people. He was locked in the infirmary in the heart of the plague, and he was completely, utterly alone. The rhythmic clicking started again, soft and insidious. It wasn't coming from down the corridor. It was coming from inside his own head. Chapter 5: The Geometry of Fear. The clicking in Leo's head was not a sound. It was a thought shaped like a sound. It was precise, insistent, a grain of sand in the delicate machinery of his consciousness. He pressed the heels of his hands against his temples, a useless gesture against an invasion from within. He had to get out. The infirmary was no longer a sanctuary. It was the epicenter of the infection. He scanned his cell again, his desperation sharpening his focus. The cot was bolted to the floor. The sink and toilet were seamless porcelain fixtures. Nothing. He looked up. High on the wall opposite the door was a small ventilation grate, a dark square against the white paint. It was his only chance. The grate was a good 10 feet up. He dragged the thin mattress from the cot and propped it against the wall. It was flimsy, providing little purchase, but it was better than nothing. He scrambled up, his boots slipping on the vinyl cover, his fingers scrabbling for a hold on the smooth wall. He managed to get his fingertips onto the lower edge of the grate. The metal was cold, humming with a faint vibration from the air circulation system. The grate was held in place by 4 standard screws. His heart sank. He had no tools. His utility belt had been taken when he was brought to the infirmary. He hung there for a moment, his muscles straining, his mind racing. He thought of Cable Jones, the old maintenance man. What would he do? The answer was simple. He would use what he had. Leo looked at his own uniform. The buckle on his belt was a solid piece of steel. It was clumsy, but it might work. He let himself drop back to the floor, his ankles jarring from the impact. He unbuckled his belt, the heavy metal cool in his trembling hand. He climbed again, this time holding the buckle between his teeth. It was an agonizing process. He could only reach one of the lower screws, wedging himself against the wall, his legs shaking with the strain. He used the corner of the buckle as a makeshift screwdriver, twisting it back and forth. The screw barely budged. Outside, the number of shambling figures in the corridor was growing. He could hear more of them now, a soft, collective shuffling, the sound of a puppet army being assembled. He put all his strength into it, gritting his teeth, feeling the muscles in his arm burn. The screw gave a loud squeak and turned a fraction of an inch. A jolt of triumph shot through him. He worked at it, twisting and turning, until the first screw came loose and dropped to the floor with a soft metallic clink. He almost wept with relief. The other 3 were just as difficult, each one a monumental battle fought in strained silence. As he worked on the final screw, he heard a new sound from the corridor, a wet, tearing sound, followed by a low, guttural growl. It was a sound of primal violence, and it cut through the eerie silence like a razor. The shuffling stopped. Leo worked faster, his panic lending him strength. The last screw came free, and he pulled the grate away, tossing it onto the cot. A wave of cool, dusty air washed over his face. The ventilation shaft was small, dark, and blessedly empty. He pulled himself up and through the opening, scraping his ribs on the sharp metal edge. He squirmed into the darkness of the shaft, his body filling the narrow space. He lay there, catching his breath, his heart thudding a frantic rhythm against the metal floor of the duct. The sounds from the infirmary were horrifyingly clear. The growling intensified, punctuated by wet, cracking noises. It was the sound of a predator feeding. Fenrir Magnar, the werewolf. Had he gotten out? Or had the contagion reached him too, twisting his lycanthropy into something new? Leo didn't wait to find out. He began to crawl, moving away from the infirmary, away from the sounds of slaughter. The shaft was a labyrinth of cold, dark metal. Dust motes danced in the narrow beam of his borrowed penlight which he held in his mouth. The air was thick with the smell of decay and rust. At every junction, he had to guess which way to go, relying on a desperate hope that he was moving toward the command center, toward Hom and Vance, toward some semblance of authority and control. He crawled for what felt like an eternity. The clicking in his head faded, replaced by the rhythmic scrape of his own movements and the pounding of his blood in his ears. He passed over other grates, catching glimpses of the horror unfolding below. In one corridor, he saw a Gorgon sister, her single eye rolling wildly in her head, staring at a wall where the mad sigil was now glowing with a faint, sickly green light. She wasn't turning anyone to stone. She was just staring, drool trickling from her lips, her mind seemingly shattered by the pattern. In another section, he heard the piper's music. It wasn't a melody of control, but a chaotic, atonal screeching that grated on the nerves, a sound that seemed designed to tear sanity apart. He crawled faster. Finally, he saw a familiar sign through a grate below, a schematic of the facility with the words Central Command highlighted in red. He was close. He found a junction leading downward and followed it, his movements clumsy in the tight space. He emerged into a smaller maintenance shaft behind a bank of humming servers. He was inside the command center's server room. He pushed open a service panel and tumbled out, landing in a crouch on the cold, tiled floor. The room was empty. The main command center was just beyond a reinforced glass door. He peered through. It was a scene of controlled chaos. Warden Vance was at his desk, his tailored suit now rumpled, his face pale and clammy. He was shouting into a phone, a satellite phone, Leo realized. The prison's internal and external lines must be dead. Unacceptable. I don't care what your protocols are. You will authorize the Damocles protocol or there won't be anything left to salvage. He slammed the phone down, his hand shaking. Fools, bureaucrats. Hom was there, along with a handful of guards, the last remnants of the uninfected staff. They were armed, their faces grim. Dr. Anishi was frantically typing at a console, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and academic fascination. "It's a mimetic contagion, Warden," Anishi shouted over the hum of the servers. "It's spreading through sight and sound. The sigil is the visual vector, the the clicking, the static. It's the auditory component. It's not just rewriting their minds, it's overwriting their biology, turning them into nodes in a network, a distributed consciousness with Kine at its center. "Can you stop it?" Vance demanded. "Stop it. It's propagating through our own security camera system. It's using the PA system. I've shut down as much as I can, but it's already deep in the core programming. It's a ghost in the machine, and the machine is the entire prison." Leo stepped out of the server room. Ham was the first to see him, her hand immediately going to her weapon before she recognized him. "Jansen, how did you get out of the infirmary?" "The vents," Leo said, his voice hoarse. "It's bad out there, they're changing." "We know," Ham said, her eyes dark. "We've lost contact with over half the facility." Vance turned his furious gaze on Leo. "You were ordered to remain in the infirmary." "The infected were in there with me," Leo shot back, his fear giving way to a hot surge of anger. "They were killing people. Magnar the werewolf. I think he's loose." Before Vance could respond, a new alert flashed on one of the main screens. It was a proximity alert from Block Z. "Oh no," Anishi whispered, his fingers flying across his keyboard. He brought up a schematic of the Aegis cell. It showed the black sphere suspended by energy beams. But now, tendrils of the same black nothingness were extending from the sphere, touching the containment field. "It's breaching," Anishi stated, his voice trembling. "It's not breaking through the field, it's absorbing it. It's eating the cage." As they watched, one of the energy beams holding the sphere flickered and died. The massive obsidian orb tilted, straining the remaining beams. A deep, groaning sound, the sound of tortured metal, echoed through the command center. "What happens when it gets out?" Leo asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Kine isn't a prisoner," Anishi said, his eyes glued to the screen, a look of horrified understanding on his face. "It's a singularity, a localized collapse of physical law. If it is freed from the focused energy of the Aegis cell, it won't just escape into the prison. It will become the prison. Every inch of this facility will become an extension of its body, subject to its will. It will be a god in a kingdom of concrete and steel." Another beam snapped. The sphere lurched violently. Red lights flashed across the command center, and a synthesized female voice began to speak from the speakers, calm and devoid of emotion. "Warning. Containment failure imminent in Block Z, catastrophic ontological collapse predicted in 5 minutes." Vance stared at the screen, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. The master of the prison was about to be consumed by his own prize. "The Damocles Protocol," Vance murmured, his voice cracking. "It's the only way, a failsafe. A localized matter-energy converter in the sub-levels. It will erase the facility, scour it from existence. Nothing in, nothing out." "It will kill us all," Ham said, her voice flat. "It will save the world," Vance countered, his eyes wild. He stumbled toward a small, reinforced panel on the wall, a keypad and a retinal scanner set beside it. "It's my responsibility, my final command." He placed his eye to the scanner. "Authorization, Warden Marcus Vance." The panel beeped, awaiting secondary authorization. Vance turned to Ham, "Officer Hom, your turn, it's the only way." Hom stared at him, then at the screens showing the spreading chaos, the sigils glowing on the walls, the shambling guards, the lurching sphere in Block Z. She looked at Leo, and for the first time he saw a flicker of despair in her eyes. She took a step toward the panel, but before she could reach it, a new image flickered onto the main screen. It was the camera feed from the corridor outside the command center. Dozens of infected staff and inmates were gathered there. They stood shoulder to shoulder, their movements synchronized, their milky eyes all staring directly at the camera. They weren't trying to break down the door. They were waiting. In the front rank stood a figure that made Leo's blood run cold. It was Gavril, the ancient vampire. His skin was pale, his eyes milky white like the others, but he was smiling. A slow, intelligent, triumphant smile. He raised a hand and, just as the guards had done, began to trace the glowing sigil in the air. As he did, the lights in the command center flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. The emergency lights sputtered on, casting long, dancing shadows. The synthesized voice from the speakers changed. It was no longer calm and female. It was a chorus of voices, 1,000 whispers speaking in unison, a sound of static and rustling leaves and clicking insects. "Warning," the new voice whispered. "The warden is no longer in command." The reinforced glass door to the command center began to vibrate, a low, resonant hum that grew in intensity. Hairline cracks, glowing with a sickly green light, spread across its surface. They were not random cracks. They were forming a pattern. The geometry of fear, the sigil, the key. They were trapped, and the monsters were coming in. Chapter 6: The Warden's Legacy. The world dissolved into a cacophony of shattering glass and shearing metal. The reinforced door to the command center did not break inward. It imploded, collapsing into a vortex of green-tinged light and razor-sharp fragments. The last of Hom's guards, caught in the blast, were thrown back like dolls, their bodies slamming against the server banks. The lights, both main and emergency, went out completely, plunging the room into absolute blackness. For a terrifying second, the only sense Leo had was auditory. The high-pitched whine of dying electronics, the wet, final gasps of the fallen guards, and the collective, soft shuffling of the things that had been waiting outside. A new light bloomed in the doorway, not the sickly green of the sigil, but the hellish, red-orange glow of embers. Two massive shapes, low to the ground, padded into the room. The warden's hounds. Their granite-like skin seemed to absorb the darkness, and their burning eyes illuminated the scene in flickering, demonic flashes. They were not shambling or blank-eyed. They were alert, their lips curled back to reveal teeth like shards of volcanic glass. They were hunting. Behind them, Gavril entered. He moved with a liquid grace that defied the jerky, puppet-like movements of the other infected. The contagion had not overwritten him. It had merged with him, a perfect, unholy synthesis. The milky film was gone from his eyes, replaced by an ancient, malevolent intelligence that now burned with the power of Kine itself. He was no longer just a vampire. He was a high priest, an avatar of the new god. "The Damocles Protocol," Gavril said, his voice a smooth, mocking baritone that filled the sudden silence. "A crude solution, wiping the board clean, but the new player prefers to use the existing pieces. Warden Vance, who had been scrambling for the authorization panel, froze. He was caught in the crimson glow of the hound's eyes, a trapped animal mesmerized by the predators before him. His face, once a mask of supreme authority, had crumpled into a canvas of pure terror. "You," Vance stammered, "you should be one of them, a mindless drone." "The Master offers a choice to those with potential," Gavril said, taking a deliberate step into the room. The hounds flanking him growled, a low rumble that vibrated in Leo's bones. "One can be a tool, or one can be a hand to wield it. I have served many masters. This one is by far the most generous." Ham reacted first. There was no hesitation, no fear, just pure pragmatic violence. She raised her sidearm and fired 2 shots. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. The bullets struck Gavril's center mass, but they didn't penetrate. They flattened against his chest, the lead slugs dropping to the floor with a dull clink, leaving no mark on his uniform. Gavril sighed, a theatrical display of disappointment. Such primitive methods. Lena, you always lacked imagination. He gestured with a flick of his wrist. One of the hounds lunged. It didn't go for Ham. It shot across the room with unnatural speed and slammed into Dr. Anishi, who was trying to crawl under a console. The hound's jaws closed on the doctor's torso with a sickening crunch of bone and flesh. Anishi let out a single, truncated scream that was cut off as the hound shook him violently, its ember eyes burning with savage joy. Leo was paralyzed, his mind unable to process the sheer speed of the violence. This was it, the end, a pointless, brutal slaughter in the dark. But Ham wasn't finished. She ignored the grisly fate of the doctor and the invulnerable vampire. She changed targets, her aim steady, her expression a mask of cold fury. She fired again, this time at the failsafe panel on the wall next to Vance. The bullet sparked against the metal, shattering the retinal scanner. "If we go down," she bit out, "we're taking this whole damn place with us." Vance screamed, a high, thin sound of despair. "You fool, you've doomed us all." "You did that when you brought that thing here," Ham retorted, backing away toward a maintenance corridor, her gun still trained on Gavril. Gavril smiled, a slow, predatory curving of his lips. A noble, if futile, gesture. But the panel is no longer necessary. The master is the machine now. It decides what lives and what is erased. He nodded to the second hound. It bounded toward Ham. Leo, finally breaking free from his paralysis, did the only thing he could think of. He grabbed a heavy, fireproof data canister from a broken server rack and hurled it at the beast. It was a desperate, stupid move, but it worked. The canister struck the hound on the side of its head. The beast wasn't injured, but it was startled, its head snapping around to fix its burning gaze on Leo. It changed course, a low growl rumbling in its chest as it stalked toward him. Ham used the opening. She wasn't running to escape. She was running toward a goal. She disappeared into the maintenance corridor. Gavril let her go, his attention now fixed on the main event in the room. The hound closed in on Leo, its steps silent, its breath smelling of ash and brimstone. Leo scrambled backward, his hands finding nothing but smooth, cold floor. He was cornered. "A brave little mouse," Gavril purred, enjoying the spectacle. But bravery is just a flavor of fear. The hound lunged. At the same instant, Warden Vance, who had been frozen in abject terror, finally moved. He didn't run. He didn't fight. He did something Leo would never have expected. He threw himself in front of the beast. "No," Vance shrieked, his arms flailing. "My facility, my legacy." The hound, its trajectory committed, slammed into the warden instead of Leo. Its jaws clamped down, not on his throat but on his shoulder. It lifted him from the ground as if he weighed nothing. Vance screamed, a raw, agonizing sound as muscle and bone tore. But he wasn't dead. The hound held him, its jaws locked, its burning eyes fixed on Gavril, awaiting a command. "Legacy," Gavril mused, tapping a finger to his chin. He looked at the trembling, bleeding warden, then at the shattered command center. "An interesting concept. Perhaps you shall have one after all." He walked over to Vance, who was now whimpering, his face a mess of tears and sweat. "You wanted to be the keeper of this place, the master of monsters. Very well. A gift from one warden to another." Gavril placed a hand on Vance's forehead. The warden convulsed, his back arching, his screams turning into a choked gurgle. The flesh of his face began to shift and run like hot wax. His bones cracked and reformed under the skin. His eyes widened until they were huge white orbs, and then they melted away, leaving empty, weeping sockets. His body elongated, his limbs stretching into long, spidery appendages. His tailored suit tore as his new form expanded, sprouting chitinous plates and superfluous joints. In seconds, Marcus Vance was gone. In his place was a thing of nightmare, a spindly, twitching creature of pale flesh and black carapace, its mouth a drooling, circular maw filled with needle-like teeth. It was a creature born of pure terror and shattered pride. It hung from the hound's mouth, twitching and clicking. Leo watched, horrified and nauseated, as the hound opened its jaws and let the newly made horror drop to the floor. The Vance thing scrambled on its new insectal legs, its blind head swiveling, its maw clicking open and shut. It seemed to recognize Gavril, its creator, and scuttled to his side like a loyal pet. Gavril looked down at his handiwork, a pleased, artistic expression on his face. "Now, this facility has a warden worthy of its new nature." He turned his cold, ancient eyes to Leo, who was still pressed against the far wall, unable to look away from the abomination that was once Marcus Vance. "As for you, little mouse," Gavril said, "the Master has other plans for you. It finds your resilience interesting, a unique variable. It wants to see what it takes for you to break." Before Leo could react, something slammed into the back of his head. The world exploded in a flash of white-hot pain, and then there was only darkness. He woke up slowly, his head throbbing with a dull, persistent agony. He was moving. He was being dragged, his boots scraping against rough concrete. He tried to open his eyes, but the lids felt heavy, glued shut. He could hear the soft shuffling of the infected around him, and the wet, clicking sounds of the thing that was once Warden Vance. He forced his eyes open. The world swam into focus. He was being dragged down a long corridor, the walls of which were no longer concrete. They were a pulsing, organic material, a fusion of flesh and metal, crisscrossed with glowing green veins that pulsed in time with a slow, deep heartbeat that seemed to come from the very foundations of the prison. The pen was no longer a building. It was a body, and Kine was its heart, mind, and soul. They were dragging him deeper into the transformed facility, deeper into the nightmare. Gavril was leading the procession, the Vance thing skittering at his heels. They were heading somewhere specific. Leo craned his neck, the movement sending a fresh wave of pain through his skull. In the distance, he saw their destination. Block F, the quiet wing, the home of the psychic horrors, the mind breakers. Gavril's words echoed in his memory. It wants to see what it takes for you to break. They weren't going to kill him. They were going to feed him to the things that fed on sanity. Chapter 7. The Symphony of Silence. The corridor to Block F was a tunnel through a living anatomy. The floor was spongy and slick. The walls wept a viscous, phosphorescent fluid, and the air, thick and humid, smelled of blood and ozone. The mad sigil was everywhere, not just drawn on the surfaces, but embedded in them, an integral part of this new biological architecture. It pulsed with a slow, hypnotic rhythm, a silent heartbeat that echoed the deep thrumming of the transformed prison. Leo's head throbbed in time with it. He was no longer being dragged. Two infected guards, their movements unnervingly synchronized, held him upright, their grips like iron clamps on his arms. They propelled him forward, their feet making no sound on the fleshy floor. The procession was led by Gavril, who moved with an unholy grace, and the skittering, clicking horror that had been Vance. It seemed to be in a state of constant, ecstatic agony, its blind head twitching from side to side, its maw drooling a thick, black ichor. They stopped before a cell that Leo recognized with a fresh wave of dread. F7. The cell of the weeping woman, the banshee whose cry could boil a person from the inside out. Her cell had been a soundproofed vacuum, a box of perfect silence. Now the heavy steel door was gone. In its place was an archway of what looked like fused bone, writhing with slow, fleshy tendrils. The opening led into absolute, impenetrable darkness. "The master is a connoisseur of irony," Gavril said, his voice echoing slightly in the organic corridor. He turned to face Leo, his smile laced with a cold, academic cruelty. This creature was contained by silence. Now it has been given a voice, a new one, a gift from the master. He gestured toward the dark opening. It no longer screams to predict death. It now sings a song of uncreation, a lullaby that dismantles the mind note by note, memory by memory. We are curious to see how long your unique resilience will last against it. The guards shoved Leo forward, pushing him over the threshold and into the darkness. He stumbled, catching his balance on the slick floor. The archway behind him sealed shut with a wet, sucking sound, plunging him into a darkness so complete it felt like a physical pressure against his eyes. The air was cold and still. He was alone. He stood frozen, every muscle tensed, listening, but there was nothing to hear. The silence was absolute, a perfect void of sound that was more terrifying than any scream. He remembered what Ham had said. You hear anything that sounds like a woman crying, you hit the silent alarm and you run. He had no alarm. There was nowhere to run. He took a shuffling step forward, his hands outstretched, and touched a wall. It was not the cold, smooth marble he expected. It was soft, yielding, and warm like living flesh. The entire cell had been transformed. He was inside an organ, a dark, living chamber in the heart of the prison god. He held his breath, listening. The silence was a weapon. It stretched his nerves taut, forcing his mind to create its own sounds. The frantic pounding of his heart, the rush of blood in his ears, the faint, imaginary echo of the clicking he'd heard in his head. He was starting to break. He knew it. This was the point. To leave him in the dark, in the silence, to let his own mind become the torturer. Then he heard it. It was not a cry. It was a whisper. A single, soft, feminine note that hung in the air, impossibly pure. It was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. It resonated deep inside his chest, a vibration of pure, clean harmony that seemed to push back the oppressive silence. Another note joined the first, then a third. A soft, gentle melody began to form, a lullaby of heartbreaking beauty. It was a song of solace, of peace. It promised an end to fear, an end to pain. He felt the tension in his shoulders ease, the frantic terror in his gut begin to dissolve. It was a song of release. He took a step toward the source of the music, a faint, shimmering light that was beginning to bloom in the center of the dark chamber. The light coalesced into a form, a woman, tall and slender, made of woven strands of pale blue light. Her face was serene, beautiful, her eyes closed as if in deep concentration. This was the weeping woman. She was not weeping. She was singing. The melody grew, becoming more complex, more beautiful. And as it did, Leo felt happy. A profound sense of peace and contentment washed over him. The horrors he had witnessed, the mimic, the Vance thing, the slaughter in the command center, they began to seem distant, unimportant, like a bad dream that was fading with the morning light. The memories lost their sharp, painful edges, becoming soft, blurred, and insignificant. It dismantles the mind, memory by memory. The thought came from a distant, panicked part of his brain, a tiny flicker of his former self screaming a warning. But the music was so beautiful. It was so much easier to let go. Why hold on to pain? Why cling to fear? The song offered a clean, quiet oblivion, a gentle unwriting. He saw a memory surface in his mind, his mother smiling at him on his 5th birthday, handing him a brightly wrapped gift. The image was warm, suffused with love. The music washed over it and the memory dissolved like sugar in water. The details faded first, the color of the wrapping paper, the cake on the table, and then the emotion drained away, leaving only a blank, factual statement. He had had a mother, he had had a birthday. The love, the joy, the warmth, they were gone, erased. The distant, terrified part of his mind screamed louder. This was not peace. This was annihilation, a gentle, melodic erasure of the soul. He had to fight it. But how do you fight a song? How do you block out a sound that bypasses your ears and resonates directly with your spirit? He tried to think of something else, something loud, ugly, and discordant to break the spell of the perfect harmony. He tried to scream, but his throat wouldn't work. The muscles were too relaxed, too peaceful. The song was winning. He stumbled backward, falling to the fleshy floor. He clawed at his ears, but it did no good. The music was already inside him. He saw another memory bubble up. His first day at the academy, the pride on his father's face. The melody wrapped around it, and the pride, the nervous excitement, the scent of the polished gymnasium floor. It all unraveled, leaving behind another empty fact. He was being hollowed out, turned into a shell. The core of who he was, the sum of his experiences and emotions, was being systematically dismantled. Desperate, he slammed his head against the soft floor. He needed pain. He needed a sharp, ugly sensation to cut through the beautiful, numbing peace. The impact was dull, unsatisfying. It didn't hurt enough. He looked at his hands. He thought of Gavril's words. It finds a crack and it seeps in. The song was a perfect, seamless surface. He needed to create a crack. He needed a discordant note. He opened his mouth, and this time he didn't try to scream. He tried to sing. His voice was a choked, tuneless croak. He sang the first thing that came into his head, a stupid drinking song he had learned in his academy days. It was a clumsy, ugly tune, and his voice was flat and terrible. Oh, the captain's wife, she baked a pie. He croaked, his voice wavering. The weeping woman faltered. A single, pure note of her song soured for a microsecond. The beautiful illusion flickered. He had found a crack. He sang louder, forcing the ugly words out, channeling all his fear and desperation into the tuneless melody. And all the crust was made of rye. The weeping woman flinched as if he had struck her. Her beautiful, serene face twisted, a flicker of anger crossing her features. Her song grew louder, more insistent, trying to overwhelm his discordant noise. But his ugly song was like a stone in a perfect pond, sending out ripples of chaos. A memory surfaced. His interview with Warden Vance, the man's arrogant confidence. Leo clung to the anger he had felt, the sense of injustice. He poured that raw, ugly emotion into his singing. The ship, it sank in a bottle of ink, he bellowed, his voice cracking. And that's the end, I do believe, I think. The weeping woman screamed. It was not her song. It was a shriek of pure, frustrated rage. The beautiful melody shattered into a million sharp, painful shards of sound. The illusion of peace was gone, replaced by a wave of raw, psychic agony that slammed into Leo, throwing him back against the wall. The light form of the woman convulsed and writhed, her serene face now a mask of fury. The archway behind him hissed open. Gavril stood there, his expression one of faint surprise and annoyance. The Vance thing skittered at his side, its head tilted. "How disappointing," Gavril said, his voice cutting through the ringing in Leo's ears. "You are more resilient than we thought. It seems the subtle approach is wasted on you." Leo lay on the floor, his head spinning, his soul feeling raw and scraped but intact. He had survived. He had held on to who he was. Gavril stepped into the cell. "No matter, there are other methods, less elegant ones." He nodded to the Van Screecher. It scuttled forward, its insectal legs clicking on the fleshy floor, its circular maw dripping with black fluid. Leo scrambled backward, his body screaming with exhaustion. He had survived the song, but he knew, with a sickening certainty, that he would not survive the monster his warden had become. He had won the battle for his mind, only to lose the war for his body. Chapter 8. The devil you know. The Vance thing scuttled toward Leo, its movements a horrifying fusion of insectal speed and human desperation. It was a predator, but there was a nuance of agony in its jerky motions, as if the last remnants of the warden's consciousness were trapped inside, a terrified passenger in a body of pure nightmare. Its maw, a wet, circular vortex of teeth, clicked rapidly, a sound of hunger and mechanical pain. Leo pushed himself backward, his boots sliding on the slick, organic floor. He was out of tricks, out of strength. The cell was a dead end. His mind, raw from the psychic assault of the Banshee's song, could barely form a coherent thought. This was it. A gruesome, meaningless end in a fleshy pit, devoured by the monster his own boss had become. He bumped against the far wall of the cell, the soft, yielding surface pressing against his back. The Vance thing loomed over him, its shadow extinguishing the faint light from the corridor. It raised one of its long, spindly forelimbs, tipped with a shard of sharpened bone, ready to skewer him. Suddenly, a voice, sharp and commanding, echoed from the corridor. "Get away from him." It was Hum. The Vance thing froze, its head swiveling toward the sound. Gavril, who had been watching with an air of detached amusement, turned as well, a flicker of genuine surprise on his face. Lena Hum stood in the archway, no longer in her neat officer's uniform. She was clad in a patchwork of scavenged armor and gear. She wore the graphite-colored chest plate of a fallen SCU guard, and her face was smeared with something dark that concealed her features in the dim light. She held a weapon Leo had never seen before, a bulky, industrial device with a heavy power cell strapped to its side and a wide, circular muzzle. It looked like something Cable Jones would have cobbled together in his workshop. It hummed with a low, dangerous energy. She wasn't alone. Flanking her were two figures that made Leo's breath catch in his throat. On her right was Fenrir Fen Magnar, the alpha werewolf. He was in his human form, but barely. His eyes glowed with a feral yellow light, his teeth were slightly elongated, and his hands were curled into claws. A heavy, rune-etched iron collar was bolted around his neck, likely the only thing keeping his full transformation at bay. On her left was Xylos, the root that walks. The ancient Leshy, a creature of wood and vine, seemed diminished and withered in this environment of flesh and concrete, but its branch-like arms were still thick as tree trunks, and its single, glowing eye burned with a cold, natural fury. This wasn't a rescue, it was a rebellion, an alliance of the damned. Gavril said, his composure returning, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. Leading a pack of broken monsters, it's a bold career change. I'm not sure it suits you. "Shut up, Gavril," snarled. The weapon in her hands whined as it charged, a ring of blue light appearing around the muzzle. "I'm only going to say this once. Give me the boy." "The boy," Gavril chuckled. "He is a curiosity of the Masters, a variable in the equation. He is not yours to take." "Everything in this prison that isn't one of you is mine to take," shot back. "Last chance." Gavril's smile widened. He gave a subtle nod to the Vance thing. It turned its attention back to Leo and lunged. Fired. A blindingly bright, white-hot beam of energy erupted from the weapon, striking the Vance thing square in the chest. It was not an explosion. It was a clean, silent erasure. The creature shrieked, a sound of static and dial tones as the beam vaporized a perfect, circular hole through its torso. The light was so intense it was like looking into the heart of the sun, and Leo saw the creature's internal structure for a bare second, a horrific latticework of nerves and chitin, before it was gone. The Vance thing collapsed, its limbs twitching, its upper and lower halves severed by the beam of pure energy. It was not dead, but it was incapacitated, writhing on the floor in two separate dying pieces. An ultraviolet projector, Gavril observed, his eyes narrowing, the first hint of genuine concern showing on his face. Cable Jones's little side project, designed to sterilize rogue biological growths. Clever, but you are still just 3. We're enough, Fenrir Magnar growled, the sound a low rumble of hate. He lunged forward, not at Gavril, but at the 2 infected guards standing dumbly in the corridor. He moved with a speed that was a blur to Leo's eyes, a whirlwind of claws and teeth. The infected guards were torn apart before they could even react, their bodies ripped to shreds with savage, efficient brutality. At the same time, Xylos, the Leshy, slammed its root-like hand into the fleshy floor. Thick, thorny vines, dark and twisted, erupted from the ground, snaking toward Gavril. The vampire sidestepped them with impossible grace. You are weak here, old wood. There is no earth for you to command. I need no earth, Xylos's voice rasped, a sound like grinding stones. Only rot. The fleshy walls of the corridor began to wither and blacken where the Leshy's vines touched them, the life draining away, replaced by a spreading, necrotic decay. Gavril hissed, a genuine expression of fury now twisting his features. This was an affront, an attack on the very body of his new god. He vanished. One moment he was there, the next he was gone, reappearing directly in front of Ham, his hand reaching for her throat. But Ham was ready. She dropped the UV projector and drew a short, heavy blade from her belt. It was a crude thing, looking more like a sharpened railroad spike than a knife. It glowed with a faint, silvery light, consecrated iron. She didn't try to stab him. She swung it in a low arc, forcing him to step back. It was a dance of predator and prey, but the roles were shifting with every move. Ham was outmatched in speed and strength, but she was a survivor. She knew how to fight things that shouldn't exist. Leo scrambled to his feet, his mind reeling. He looked at the twitching remains of the Vance thing, at the bloody carnage of the guards, at the desperate, deadly fight unfolding before him. He had to do something. He saw the UV projector lying on the floor where Ham had dropped it. It was heavy, humming with power. He grabbed it, his hands shaking as he lifted the bulky weapon. He swung the muzzle toward Gavril, who was pressing his attack on Ham, forcing her back step by step. Leo squeezed the trigger. The beam of pure white light shot past Ham's shoulder and struck Gavril. The vampire screamed, a sound of pure agony as the concentrated light hit his arm. His flesh smoked and blackened, his tailored suit instantly incinerated. It wasn't just sunlight. It was the pure, unfiltered spectrum of a star, a weaponized sunrise. Gavril recoiled, clutching his burnt and withered arm, his face a mask of incandescent rage. "You!" he shrieked at Leo, his voice losing its cultured smoothness, becoming something raw and ancient. Insolent gnat, the master will unmake you molecule by molecule. He was about to lunge again, but a deep, resonant hum filled the air. It was the sound of the prison itself, the deep thrumming of Kind's consciousness, and it was angry. The fleshy walls began to pulse violently. The entire corridor constricted, the ceiling lowering, the walls pressing in. It is displeased, Xylos rasped, pulling its vines back from the decaying walls. The body rejects the infection. We have to go, Ham yelled, grabbing Leo by the arm and pulling him back. Now. Fenrir, finished with his bloody work, loped back to them, his yellow eyes burning with an unsatisfied bloodlust. I am not done with him, the werewolf growled, looking at Gavril. You will be if this place crushes us, Ham countered. Move. She led them in a retreat back down the pulsing, writhing corridor. Gavril did not follow. He stood amidst the carnage, cradling his burnt arm, his face a portrait of pure hatred as he watched them go. He would recover, and he would not forget. Ham led them through a maze of twisting, organic tunnels, her knowledge of the prison's original layout allowing her to navigate the new, nightmare geography. Where are we going? Leo shouted over the deep, groaning sounds of the prison. Somewhere he won't look for us, Ham replied, her voice grim. Somewhere he thinks is already his. She led them to a heavy maintenance hatch, its surface covered in the same glowing sigil they'd seen everywhere. Fenrir tore it from its hinges with a single, powerful wrench. Beyond it was a ladder leading down into darkness. Down, Ham commanded, all the way. They descended into the sub-levels, the guts of the prison. This area was less transformed, the organic growth thinner here, clinging to the original concrete and steel like a parasitic mold. The air was cooler, smelling of stagnant water and rust. They emerged into a vast, cavernous space. It was the prison's primary sewer and drainage system. A river of black, foul-smelling water flowed through a deep channel in the center of the room. And in the center of the river, half submerged, was a creature so immense it beggared belief. It was a slug, a colossal, pale, eyeless thing, its flesh translucent and glowing with a faint internal luminescence. Its body, hundreds of feet long, filled the channel. This was the cellar slug, the psychic waste disposal unit. Its mind, however, was not its own. The sigil of Kind was branded on its pale, broad head, glowing with the same green light as the rest of the prison. It was another tool of the master. You said he wouldn't look for us here, Leo said, staring in horror at the giant, enslaved creature. Not us, Ham said, her gaze fixed on the slug. Him. From the shadows on the far side of the cavern, a figure emerged. He was a small, wiry man in a tattered prison jumpsuit, his face covered in scars, his eyes burning with a fanatical, paranoid intensity. The Oracle of Rust, Ham said, her voice low. A technomancer, he can talk to decaying metal. And broken things, the Oracle croaked, his voice like grinding gears. He gestured a welcoming, grimy hand. Welcome, rebels, to the heart of the machine's glorious decay. He smiled, revealing a set of corroded, metal-capped teeth. Have you come to join the revolution? Chapter 9, A Revolution of Rust. The Oracle of Rust's throne room was a forgotten maintenance hub deep in the bowels of the prison. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and corrosion. Wires, thick as pythons, hung from the ceiling like dead vines, their insulation cracked and peeling. Rusted pipes wept slick, dark fluid onto the grated floor. In the center of the chamber, the Oracle perched on a chair made from scavenged circuit boards and fused metal, a grotesque throne for a king of decay. He was a twitching, nervous bundle of energy, his eyes constantly darting into the shadows. His followers, a small, ragged band of a dozen or so inmates, were a motley collection of the prison's outcasts, low-level ghouls, a disgraced warlock, a handful of humans who had survived the initial chaos through sheer luck and brutality. They were armed with crude, makeshift weapons, pipes sharpened to a point, shields made from maintenance panels, clubs wrapped in electrified wire. This was not an army, it was a desperate last stand. "The flesh god offers order," the oracle declared, his voice rising with sermon-like fervor. He gestured wildly at the ceiling, at the faint, pulsing glow that was visible even down here. A perfect, unified consciousness, a world without choice, without chaos, without rust. It is an abomination, a tyranny of the pristine. He pointed a trembling, grace-stained finger at Ham. "You, the warden's bootlicker, you upheld the old order of steel and stone. Why do you fight the new one of flesh and bone? It is the same cage, just repainted." "The old cage had rules," Ham said, her voice flat, unimpressed by his theatrics. She kept the UV projector held at a low ready, its presence a silent threat. "This one just wants to digest us. We need to get to the armory in sub-level 3. It's shielded. We can regroup there, maybe even find a way to contact the outside." "The armory is useless," the oracle scoffed. "Guns and bullets against a god that eats reality. Folly. The only way to fight a system is from within, to poison it, to introduce a flaw, to become a glorious, beautiful malfunction." He cackled, a dry, rattling sound. "The flesh god has a body, and all bodies have a weakness, a heart, a brain. We must find it, and we must break it." Leo listened, his head still throbbing. The oracle was clearly insane, but his words held a strange, compelling logic. Vance had tried to erase the prison. Ham was trying to escape it. The oracle wanted to kill it. Of the three, his plan sounded the most like hope. "Its brain is everywhere," Leo heard himself say. The others turned to look at him. "It's Kine, Subject Zero. It's in Block Z, but it's also the walls, the floor. It is the prison." The oracle's paranoid eyes fixed on Leo. "The new pup, the one who survived the songbird, you have the master's stink on you. It is interested in you. It has left a hook in your mind." Leo felt a chill run down his spine. The clicking, the dream of the library. What hook? "A back door," the oracle whispered, leaning forward on his throne, his expression greedy. "A vulnerability, a connection. We can use that. We can turn you into a weapon, a key to unlock its mind." Before Leo could process the horrifying implications of that, Fenrir Magnar, the werewolf, let out a low, impatient growl. "Enough talk. My pack is dead or worse. I want to kill something. The vampire is still alive. I can smell him even down here. He's coming." "The wolf is right," Ham said, her gaze sweeping the entrances to the chamber. Gavril won't be happy we ruined his pet project. He'll send hunters. Let them come, the oracle shrieked, jumping to his feet. Let them see the glory of decay. Let them taste the beautiful entropy of rust and ruin. As if on cue, a piercing, high-frequency screech echoed from the tunnel they had just come through. It was a sound of stressed metal and animal rage. The oracle's ragged followers tensed, gripping their makeshift weapons tighter. From the darkness of the tunnel, two creatures emerged. They were glimmer cats, the prison's phase-shifting alarm system, but they had been grotesquely transformed. They were larger now, the size of panthers, their bodies a shimmering, unstable fusion of feline muscle and jagged, rusted metal. Their bioluminescence had been corrupted into a sickly green glow, and their mouths were filled with shards of broken glass. They were no longer just alarms. They were assassins, imbued with the oracle's own power over decay. These were his creations. "My children," the oracle breathed, his face alight with mad pride. "My beautiful broken things." But the cats were not looking at Ham or her small group. They were looking past them, at the other end of the chamber. From the opposite tunnel, a new threat appeared. It was a squad of infected SCU guards, their heavy armor now fused directly to their flesh. Their helmet visors glowed with the same green light of the sigil, and they moved with a perfect, silent synchronicity. They were armed not with their old rifles, but with weapons grown from their own bodies, long, sharp blades of bone extruding from their forearms. They were the flesh god's elite soldiers. The two groups of monsters stood at opposite ends of the chamber, a silent, tense standoff. Ham's rebels were caught in the middle, trapped between two warring factions of the New World. "It seems," Ham said, her voice dangerously quiet, "that your revolution has a competitor." The oracle's face twisted in a snarl of pure hatred. "Blasphemers. They seek to perfect the flesh, to heal it. True beauty is in the flaw, the rust, the inevitable collapse." The standoff broke. The infected guards charged forward, their bone blades raised. The corrupted glimmer cats shrieked and launched themselves to meet the attack. The chamber erupted into a maelstrom of violence. It was a battle of two opposing nightmares. The oracle's chaotic, decaying entropy versus Kind's unified, organic order. Metal screeched against bone. The cats phased and shimmered, their claws tearing through the guards' fused armor, leaving deep, festering wounds that glowed with a green, corrosive light. The guards fought with cold, disciplined precision, their bone blades stabbing and slashing, impaling one of the cats against a wall. It dissolved into a shower of rusted scrap and dying light. The oracle's followers let out a ragged war cry and charged into the fray, swinging their crude weapons with fanatical abandon. Ham's small group was caught in the crossfire. "This way," Ham yelled, pulling Leo toward a narrow service ladder on the side of the chamber. "Let the monsters fight it out." Fenrir let out a savage howl and leaped into the battle, ignoring Ham's order. He was a whirlwind of fury, his claws tearing through infected and corrupted alike. He was not fighting for a cause. He was fighting for the sheer, bloody release of it. Xylos, the Leshy, stood its ground, its wooden form a stoic island in the sea of chaos. It stomped a foot, and the grated metal floor around it buckled and warped, tree-like roots of rusted rebar erupting to ensnare the legs of the combatants, dragging them down. Leo scrambled up the ladder after Ham. He looked down at the swirling, chaotic battle. It was a war for the soul of the prison, a conflict between two different flavors of madness. He saw the Oracle, cackling with glee as he hurled what looked like fistfuls of rusted bolts that detonated like shrapnel. He saw Fenrir tear the head from an infected guard. He saw Xylos slowly, methodically crushing the life from one of the Glimmer cats. He reached the top of the ladder and followed Ham into another narrow maintenance corridor. "We're not going to make it, are we?" Leo asked, his voice shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline. "Not like this," Ham admitted, pausing to reload the UV projector with a fresh power cell. Her hands were steady, her movements economical. "The Oracle is insane. Fenrir is a berserker, and Xylos is dying. The farther he is from the earth, the weaker he gets." "So what do we do?" "We change the plan," Ham said. "The armory is a dead end. The Oracle's revolution is a suicide pact. There's only one person in this prison who might have a real contingency plan, a way out." "Who?" Leo asked. "The one who runs the black market, the one who deals in secrets and escape routes, the one who has had 1,000 years to plan for a rainy day." Ham's face was grim in the dim light. "We're going to find the Collector." Chapter 10: A Bargain in Brass. The path to the Collector's cell was a journey through the prison's decaying memory. Ham led Leo through forgotten sub-levels and long-abandoned storage areas, places the spreading organic corruption of Kine had not yet fully reached. Here, the horror was of a different kind, the mundane horror of neglect and decay. They passed storerooms filled with the confiscated belongings of inmates, mountains of personal effects that told 1,000 tragic stories. They navigated around collapsed corridors and flooded pump stations, the original concrete and steel of the prison groaning under the strain of the monstrous new life that had been injected into it. "The Collector's official designation is J14, Ham explained as they moved, her voice a low, hushed whisper. "A djinn of the highest order. His crime was granting the wish of a paranoid dictator to know what his enemies were thinking. The resulting wave of shared telepathic panic destabilized 3 countries and triggered a war. He's been here for over 200 years." "How is he a contingency plan?" Leo asked, stepping over a puddle of viscous, foul-smelling liquid. "He's a traitor," Ham said. "He deals in favors, information, objects. His cell is his shop. The guards had a running joke. If you needed something, anything from a specific bottle of wine to a forbidden grimoire, you went to the Collector. He could get it for you, for a price." "What kind of price?" Ham stopped and looked at him, her expression serious. "Never years off your life. Never your soul, too cliché for him. He takes specific things, a cherished memory, the ability to trust another person, your sense of direction. He takes parts of you that you don't realize you need until they're gone. He's a thief of the abstract." They finally arrived at the Collector's block. It was an annex off the main facility, a place for special containment inmates who required unique environments. The corruption here was minimal, almost as if it were being held at bay. The air was dry and smelled faintly of exotic spices and old parchment. The collector's cell was not a cell. It was a small, circular room, the walls lined with shelves that were crammed with a bizarre assortment of objects: antique clocks, astrolabes, stacks of leather-bound books, strange scientific instruments, and artifacts that defied description. In the center of the room, on a simple wooden table, sat a small, ornate brass flask, its surface covered in intricate, swirling patterns. There was no one else in the room. "He's in the flask," Ham said quietly. "It's his prison and his home. The only way to talk to him is to touch it." Leo stared at the flask. It seemed to hum with a quiet, contained power. All his instincts screamed at him not to go near it. "You're the one he'll want to talk to," Ham said. "You're new, a blank slate. And according to the oracle, you have the master's attention. That makes you valuable, a unique commodity." She looked at Leo, her face unreadable. "Be careful what you say. Be very careful what you agree to. And don't, under any circumstances, make a wish." Leo took a deep breath and stepped into the cell. He walked to the table and reached out a trembling hand, his fingers hovering over the cool, smooth metal of the flask. The moment his skin made contact, the world changed. The cell, the shelves, they all vanished. He was standing in a vast, opulent tent, the kind from a desert fantasy. The air was warm and smelled of cinnamon and cloves. Silk cushions were scattered on rich carpets, and low tables were laden with fruits and wine. A fountain bubbled softly in the corner. Sitting on a pile of cushions, casually smoking a long, silver hookah, was a man. He was handsome, with dark, intelligent eyes that twinkled with amusement. He wore silken robes and a confident, welcoming smile. This was the collector. "Ah," the djinn said, his voice smooth and melodious. "A new customer, and a nervous one at that. Please come in, have a seat. The world outside is so noisy, isn't it?" Leo remained standing, his heart pounding. "You're the collector." "A title given to me by my less imaginative jailers," the djinn said with a wave of his hand. "I am merely a merchant, a facilitator. I provide solutions for those with problems. And you, Leo Jansen, have a very large problem." "How do you know my name?" "Oh, I know all the names in this dreary place," the collector said, taking a puff from his hookah and exhaling a plume of sweet-smelling smoke that formed into the shape of a screaming face before dissipating. "I make it my business to. I know of your arrival, your unfortunate encounter with the mimic, your time with the songbird, your brief alliance with the madman of Rust. You are the most interesting thing to happen to this prison in a century." He leaned forward, his eyes sharp and appraising. "And now you have come to my humble shop. What is it you seek? An escape? A weapon? The head of that arrogant vampire on a silver platter?" "We need a way out," Leo said, his voice steadier than he felt. "A contingency. Ham said you might have one." "Ah, Officer Ham, a woman of admirable pragmatism and zero imagination," the collector mused. "Yes, I have contingencies, many of them for every possible catastrophe: an earthquake, a nuclear strike, a demonic incursion. I have a plan for each. And yes, even one for this." He gestured vaguely, as if the transformation of the prison into a living god was a minor inconvenience. I have an object, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. A key. It doesn't open a door in this facility. It opens a door between facilities. A secret back channel built by the original architects. A way to move assets between black sites without anyone knowing. It can take you to another prison just like this one halfway across the world. A clean slate. An escape. Hope, sharp and painful, flared in Leo's chest. What do you want for it? The collector smiled, a slow, deliberate expression that did not reach his eyes. There is the question, the crux of the transaction. A unique item requires a unique price. I have all the memories of fear and despair I could ever want. I have no need for years of life. I want something new, something specific to your situation. He took another puff from his hookah. You have, as the oracle so crudely put it, a hook in your mind, a connection to the master kind. A sliver of its attention is focused on you. It is a subtle metaphysical link. I want that. You want my connection to Kine? Leo asked, confused. Precisely, the collector said. Think of it as a telephone line. Kine is on one end and you are on the other. I want you to give me the receiver. I want to be the one it speaks to. I want to listen in on the thoughts of a god. Leo stared at him, horrified. Why? Knowledge, my dear boy. The secrets of creation and uncreation whispered into my ear. The thoughts of a being that can warp reality. It is the ultimate acquisition, a prize beyond measure. The jinn's eyes burned with a covetous fire that was far more terrifying than Gavril's rage or the oracle's madness. What would happen to me? Leo asked. The hook would be removed, the collector said with a shrug. The master would lose its specific interest in you. You would be free of its attention. No more clicking in your head. No more tailored nightmares. You would just be another mouse in its maze, no more or less significant than any other. It seems to me a rather excellent bargain. It was tempting, terribly tempting, to be free of the constant, creeping dread of being watched, of being a target, to have the clicking in his head silenced for good, to escape this hell and start over. But the oracle's words came back to him. We can turn you into a weapon, a key. This connection, this curse, it was also the only thing that made him unique, the only leverage they had. To give it away would be to save himself and a handful of others, but it would doom everyone and everything else in this place. It would be giving the most powerful secret in the world to the most selfish being he had ever met. No, Leo said, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. The collector's smile did not falter, but his eyes grew cold. No, a bold choice, a foolish one. Are you so attached to your torment? It's not mine to give, Leo said, his resolve hardening. It's the only weapon we have left. The jinn was silent for a long moment, studying Leo's face. He took a final puff from his hookah and set it aside. Very well. I admire conviction, even when it is tragically misplaced. But you have wasted my time, and I am not a being that tolerates waste. There must be something else you want, Leo said desperately. Oh, there is, the collector said, his voice turning sharp and cruel. Since you will not give me what I desire, I will simply take what I am owed as compensation for this consultation. Take what? The collector snapped his fingers. Leo felt a strange, wrenching sensation in his mind, a feeling of something being torn away. It wasn't a memory. It wasn't a skill. It was something deeper. "What did you do?" he cried out. The opulent tent, the cushions, the gin, they all dissolved. He was back in the cold, dusty cell. Ham was staring at him, her face etched with concern. "Leo, what happened? You were only gone for a second." Leo looked at her familiar, grim face. He saw the scars, the exhaustion, the fierce determination in her eyes, and he felt nothing. The connection he had felt with her, the burgeoning trust, the sense of them being comrades in this nightmare, it was gone. She was just a person, a stranger. He looked at his own hands, then back at her face. The part of him that was capable of forming a bond with another human being, the part that recognized an ally, the part that could trust. The collector had taken it. He was truly, completely alone. Chapter 11. The Heart of the Machine. The absence of trust was a cold, clean void. Leo looked at Ham, and where once he had seen a reluctant ally, a bastion of competence in a world gone mad, he now saw only a collection of variables. He saw her weapon, her tactical gear, her exhausted but resolute expression. He analyzed them as assets and liabilities. The warmth of camaraderie, the shared terror that had forged a fragile bond between them, had been surgically removed from his mind. He was a solitary island, and everyone else was just part of the ocean. "He wouldn't make a deal," Leo said, his voice flat, devoid of the panic and despair he should have felt. He registered the change in his own tone, nodding it with a clinical detachment. This emotional distance was a new tool, or perhaps a new wound. It was hard to tell. "He wanted my connection to Kine. I refused." Ham's eyes narrowed, searching his face. She was a keen observer of people, and she knew something was wrong. "What did he take from you, Leo?" "Nothing important," Leo lied, the falsehood coming easily, unburdened by guilt. Guilt required a connection to the person being wronged. He no longer had that. "We need to get back to the Oracle. He was insane, but he was right. The only way out is through. We have to find the prison's heart and destroy it." Ham was silent for a moment, her gaze unwavering. She didn't believe him. He could see the calculation in her eyes as she reevaluated him, reassessed the asset at her side. But she nodded. His logic, at least, was sound. "Agreed," she said, her voice clipped. "But we're not going back to the Rust King's little war zone. If we're going to do this, we need better weapons. And we need to find what's left of my people." She led him on a new path, not deeper, but upward, toward the more heavily patrolled mid-levels. The organic corruption was thicker here, the fleshy walls pulsing with a stronger, more regular rhythm. The low, thrumming heartbeat of Kine was a constant presence. They moved with a desperate stealth, sticking to maintenance shafts and ventilation ducts. The prison was teeming with Kine's extensions. Shambling, sigil-eyed guards patrolled in synchronized squads. Monstrous fusions of flesh and metal, things that had once been glimmer cats or warden's hounds, stalked the corridors. They found the survivors of Ham's security team barricaded in a small, shielded server hub near the medical wing. There were only 4 of them left, all that remained of the dozens of guards who had been on duty. They were led by a grim-faced veteran named Cortez, a man whose face was a roadmap of old scars. They had weapons, but they were running low on ammunition and power cells. Their expressions were a mixture of relief and despair when they saw Ham. "Lena," Cortez said, his voice a low growl, "we thought you were gone, the whole command staff." "Vance is gone," Ham said, cutting him off. "Anishi is dead, I'm in command now." She didn't waste time on sentiment. "Report." "It's a slaughterhouse," another guard, a young woman named Riggs, said, her voice trembling. "They aren't just killing us, they're converting us, we saw it. One of the things that used to be a Gorgon, it cornered Peterson. It didn't kill him, it opened its mouth and this black liquid poured out, covered him. He started screaming and then he just stood up. His eyes were white. He was one of them." "It's a hive mind," Leo stated, the words coming out cold and analytical. "Kine isn't just a consciousness. It's a virus that spreads through physical and psychic means. It's building an army by assimilating the prison's resources, including the personnel." The guards stared at him. He could see their fear, their confusion. Before, he would have felt a pang of sympathy. Now he only saw inefficiency. Fear made them slow, unreliable. "We can't fight an army," Cortez said, shaking his head. "We need to get out." "There is no out," Ham countered. "The collector's escape route was a dead end. Our only play is to cripple the entity, cut the head off the snake." "The Oracle said we could use my connection," Leo added, turning to Ham. "He said it was a backdoor, a way into its mind." Ham looked at him, her expression calculating. "And you trust the word of a lunatic who worships rust?" "I don't trust anyone," Leo replied, the words starkly true. "But it's the only tactical advantage we have. Kine is in Block Z, that's its physical core. But its consciousness is the network. If I can get into the network, maybe I can find the central node. The heart the Oracle was talking about. A weak point." A plan began to form in the cold, clear space of his mind. A strategy unclouded by fear or hope. It was a terrible, desperate plan. "The infirmary," Leo said. "The somnambulist, the dream walker." Cortez cursed. "Subject S-21. The guy who put half a dozen agents into permanent comas by trapping them in their own nightmares. He's one of the most dangerous psychics in here." "Exactly," Leo said. "His body is catatonic, but his mind is a weapon. He can navigate psychic spaces. If Kine's consciousness is a network, then the dreamscape of the prison is the terrain. The somnambulist can be my guide. And the experimental tech in the infirmary, the stuff they used to try and cure him. It's a psychic amplifier. We can use it to force a connection, to hack the hive mind." The guards exchanged horrified looks. Ham stared at Leo for a long, hard moment. She was seeing the change in him now, the cold, ruthless logic that had replaced the terrified rookie. She didn't like it, but she couldn't argue with the strategy. "It's a suicide mission," Cortez growled. "You'd be diving headfirst into the mind of a god, led by a serial mind killer." "It's our only move," Ham said, her voice final. She had made her decision. "Riggs, you're the best tech we have left. Can you get the amplifier working?" The young guard nodded, her face pale. "I think so. I've read the files. It's dangerous, highly unstable." "Everything is dangerous and unstable now," Ham said. "Cortez, you're with me. We run interference. We clear a path to the infirmary and we hold it for as long as we can. Leo, Riggs, you get one shot at this. Don't miss. Getting to the infirmary was a brutal running battle. Ham and Cortez were a ruthlessly efficient team, moving with the grim synergy of soldiers who had fought together for years. They laid down suppressing fire, created diversions, and cleared corridors with cold, precise violence. Leah followed in their wake, his mind strangely calm, the UV projector feeling like a natural extension of his own body. He vaporized a charging, infected guard without flinching, the act feeling as impersonal as deleting a line of code. They reached the infirmary, finding it a charnel house. The battle between the Oracle's forces and kinds had spilled over into here. The bodies of corrupted cats and infected guards lay amidst the shattered medical equipment. But the inner chamber, the one where Leo had been held, was untouched, and beyond it was the specialized containment cell of the somnambulist. The cell was a medical ward, dominated by a complex bed covered in a spiderweb of wires and tubes. The somnambulist lay on the bed, his body thin and atrophied, his eyes closed, his face placid. He was physically helpless, but Leo could feel a powerful, sleeping consciousness radiating from him, a deep well of psychic energy. Next to the bed was the amplifier, a large, intimidating machine consisting of a heavy metal helmet covered in electrodes and a console flickering with complex readouts. "This is it," Riggs said, her voice trembling as she began powering up the console. "The psychoharmonic amplifier, designed to create a bridge between minds." "Get it ready," Ham ordered, turning to face the doorway. Cortez and the other two guards were setting up defensive positions, barricading the entrance with overturned gurneys and equipment. The deep, rhythmic thrumming of the prison was getting louder. They had been noticed. Riggs worked frantically, her fingers flying across the console. "It's online, but the power grid is unstable. I can't guarantee how long it will hold." "It just needs to hold long enough," Ham said. She turned to Leo. He was standing by the amplifier looking at the helmet. His face was a mask of calm determination. The scared rookie she'd met 2 days ago was completely gone. In his place was a cold, calculating soldier, a stranger wearing a familiar face. She felt a pang of something she couldn't name, regret perhaps, a loss. "Leo," she said, her voice softer than he'd heard it before, "if you get in there and you can't get out, I'm sorry." Leo looked at her. He understood her words, the emotion behind them, but they didn't register. Apologies were for people who could feel them. "Don't be sorry," he said, his voice level. "Just be ready to pull the plug if I get compromised." He picked up the heavy helmet. It felt cold in his hands. He took one last look at the physical world, the desperate faces of the guards, the flickering lights of the console, Ham's grim, resolute expression. Then he placed the helmet over his head. Riggs tapped a final command into the console, bridging connection, now. The world dissolved. It was not a gentle fading to black. It was a violent, shattering explosion of light, sound, and pure information. Leo was no longer in the infirmary. He was nowhere. He was a disembodied point of consciousness floating in an infinite, boiling sea of raw data. This was the network, the hive mind, the consciousness of kind. It was a universe of pure thought, and it was utterly alien. He saw streams of logic that defied mathematics, geometries that made his human mind ache, colors that had no name. And everywhere he felt the presence of the master, a vast, cold, hungry intelligence, a god of abstract concepts and ontological decay. He was hopelessly lost, an insignificant microbe in an infinite ocean. Then a voice cut through the chaos. It was not a voice of words, but of pure thought projected directly into his consciousness. Newcomer, you are not of the master, you are separate, broken. A figure coalesced out of the storm of data. It was a man, thin and gaunt, his form shimmering and unstable. The somnambulist, his guide. The master feels your presence, the somnambulist projected. It is curious. It is turning its gaze upon you. This is not a safe place to be. Where is the heart? Leo projected back, his own thoughts clumsy and crude in this space. The central node, the weakness. The somnambulist turned, his form wavering. He pointed into the swirling chaos. There is no single heart. The master is decentralized. But there is a place where its consciousness is most focused. A nexus. The place where it first anchored itself to your world. He showed Leo an image, a memory pulled from the network. It was the moment of Kind's arrival, the black cube opening in the Sally port, the silent, humanoid shape of absence. But something else is there, the somnambulist communicated, a flicker of what felt like fear entering his thoughts, a core program, an original directive that the master has been unable to erase, an anchor of logic it cannot digest. The dreamwalker showed Leo another image, this one buried deep, corrupted but still present. It was a person, a face Leo recognized with a jolt of shock. It was Cable Jones, the grizzled old maintenance man, but he wasn't just a maintenance man. He was standing in Block Z before Kind was ever brought there, inputting commands into the Aegis cell's core programming. He was one of the prison's original architects. The failsafe he had built in was not the Damocles protocol. It was himself, his own consciousness, digitized and hidden, a ghost in the machine waiting for a trigger. He is the heart of the original machine, the somnambulist projected, and the master has built its body around him, like a pearl forming around a grain of sand. To reach him is to touch the master's most vulnerable point. The somnambulist turned his gaze back to Leo, but the nexus is guarded, not by puppets of flesh but by concepts, the master's oldest and most loyal acquisitions, its lieutenants. The data storm around them swirled and parted, revealing three towering, terrifying figures. The first was a being of perfect, crystalline order, its form constantly shifting into complex, impossible geometric shapes. It radiated a feeling of cold, unbending law. The second was a vortex of despair, a whirlwind of sobbing, screaming faces, a creature made of pure, weaponized grief. The third and most terrifying was Gavril, but it was not the vampire. It was the idea of Gavril, a towering, kingly figure clad in shadows and regal arrogance, the perfect archetype of the predator, the tyrant, the master. Order, despair, and dominance, the somnambulist communicated, his thought voice laced with dread. They are the guardians of the nexus. To pass them is impossible. Leo looked at the conceptual titans, then at his own insignificant point of consciousness. He was nothing, but he had a guide, and he had a purpose, cold and clear in his mind. Nothing is impossible, Leo projected back, his thought infused with the cold, emotionless logic he had gained from the collector's theft. It's just a problem to be solved. Chapter 12. The Ghosts in the Code. The psychic landscape shifted. The boiling sea of raw data calmed, coalescing into a twisted, logical representation of the prison itself. It was a place of impossible architecture, where corridors spiraled into infinity and doors opened into swirling vortexes of memory. This was Kind's mind, its inner sanctum, and Leo and the somnambulist were trespassers. The three conceptual guardians stood before them, towering and immense, barring the path to the nexus. They are archetypes, the somnambulist projected, his thought form flickering with static. They cannot be fought with force. They must be undone. How? Leo asked, his mind racing, processing the situation with the cold, detached clarity that was now his only strength. The master consumes patterns, but it also consumes their flaws, the somnambulist explained. To undo them, you must present them with a paradox, a logical contradiction they cannot resolve, a flaw in their own nature. The first guardian, the being of crystalline order, stepped forward. Its form shifted from a perfect cube to a dodecahedron, then to a shape that made Leo's mind ache. It radiated an aura of absolute, unbending certainty. It was the concept of law, of rules, of everything in its proper place. Anomaly detected, it projected, its thought voice a chorus of perfectly synthesized tones. You are chaos. You are a flaw. You must be corrected. You will be assimilated. The world around them began to change, the impossible architecture snapping into a perfect, repeating grid. The very fabric of this mental space was being forced into a rigid, crystalline pattern. Leo felt a crushing pressure on his consciousness, an overwhelming compulsion to conform, to become part of the perfect, repeating structure. It will lock you into an infinite loop of logic, the somnambulist warned, his own form struggling against the forced patterning. It will trap your consciousness forever. Leo fought against the pressure, his mind searching for a paradox, a flaw in the concept of perfect order. How do you break a rule with a rule? The answer clicked into place, a moment of cold, intuitive insight. You don't break the rule. You follow it to its absurd conclusion. You are order, Leo projected, focusing his entire consciousness into a single, sharp thought. Your function is to correct flaws, to impose structure on chaos. Correct, the being of order replied, its pressure increasing. Then correct this, Leo shot back, and he presented it with a thought form, a mental image. It was the symbol for infinity, a lemniscate, a loop with no beginning and no end. But inside the loop he placed a single, simple instruction. This statement is false. It was the liar's paradox, a simple, self-referential contradiction, a perfect, logical loop that breaks logic. The being of order focused on the paradox. It tried to process it, to assimilate it, to force it into its perfect grid, but it couldn't. If the statement was true, then it was false. If it was false, then it was true. It was a flaw that could not be corrected, a piece of chaos that defied all rules. The guardian froze. Its crystalline form began to vibrate violently. Cracks of pure, black chaos spread across its perfect facets. A high-pitched whine of tortured logic filled the psychic space. With a final, deafening shriek of paradox, the being of order shattered, exploding into a cloud of glittering, useless dust. The rigid grid that had been imposed on the world collapsed. The path was clear. Clever, the somnambulist projected, a hint of admiration in his thoughts. But the next one is not so simple. It does not follow logic. The second guardian, the vortex of despair, drifted forward. It was a swirling tornado of screaming, weeping faces, a monument to grief and hopelessness. It did not attack with logic, but with emotion. A wave of pure, undiluted sorrow washed over Leo, a soul-crushing wave of every failure he had ever had, every loss he had ever felt. It was the weeping woman's song, amplified 1,000 times. He felt the memory of his parents, the blank, factual statements he had been left with, and the ghost of the love that had once been there. The despair was a hook, trying to latch onto that ghost, to pull him down into its swirling depths. But the collector's theft had been a blessing in disguise. The part of Leo that could truly feel that loss, the part that could connect with that grief, it was gone. The wave of despair washed over him and found nothing to hold on to. He was a smooth, cold stone, and the sorrow simply flowed around him. He felt nothing. The guardian of despair seemed confused. It intensified its assault, throwing images of death, failure, and loneliness at him. It showed him Ham dying, the last of the rebels being slaughtered, the world outside being consumed by Kain. They were horrific images, but they were just data. He registered them, analyzed their tactical implications, and discarded them. They did not cause him to despair. They simply provided new information. The vortex faltered, its screaming faces turning to expressions of confusion. It was showing him the abyss, and he was simply staring back, unmoved. A being of pure emotion was helpless against a being with no emotion. Slowly its energy depleted, the vortex of despair dissipated, its component faces fading into the psychic ether like smoke. 2 guardians down. Only one remained, the archetype of Gavril, dominance. The shadowy, kingly figure strode forward, an aura of immense, ancient authority radiating from him. He did not attack with logic or emotion. He attacked with pure will. "You are nothing," the Gavril archetype projected, his thought voice a command that brooked no argument. "You are a slave, a piece on a board. Kneel." Leo felt an overwhelming compulsion to obey. It was not a logical argument or an emotional appeal. It was a fundamental law of this new reality. Gavril was the master and he was the slave. His consciousness buckled, his thought form beginning to bend, to kneel before this titan of will. This is the master's core nature, the somnambulist warned, his own form flickering weakly. The desire to dominate, to command. It is the foundation of its consciousness. You cannot defy it directly. Leo fought against the command, but it was like trying to push back the tide. The Gavril archetype was right. In this place, in a direct contest of will, he was nothing compared to a conceptual being powered by a god. But he wasn't alone. The oracle said I was a key, Leo projected, a desperate, frantic thought aimed at the somnambulist. A backdoor. What did he mean? A connection, a vulnerability, the somnambulist replied. The master is focused on you. Its gaze is a line of energy. A line has two ends. Leo understood. He couldn't fight Gavril's will with his own, but maybe he could fight it with something else. He stopped resisting the command to kneel. He let his consciousness submit. And in that moment of submission, he opened the connection. He opened the back door. He stopped broadcasting and started receiving. He let the full, undivided attention of Kine, the cold, alien god mind, flow through him, directly into its own guardian. The Gavril archetype faltered. It had commanded Leo to kneel, and he had. But through Leo, it was now receiving a command from a higher authority, an infinitely more powerful will, the will of the master itself. Kneel, the Gavril archetype had commanded Leo. Kneel, Kine now commanded the Gavril archetype, using Leo as a conduit. The archetype was trapped in a feedback loop of its own nature. It was the embodiment of dominance, but it was being dominated by its own source. It could not disobey the master, but its entire existence was based on the premise of being the one who commands, not the one who obeys. Its shadowy form began to convulse. Paradox, I am the master, I must obey the master, I command, I kneel. The archetype roared in agony, a sound of tearing reality. Its kingly form flickered, shifting between the powerful, commanding predator and a cowering, kneeling slave. The contradiction was tearing it apart from the inside. With a final, explosive cry of existential agony, the archetype of dominance tore itself in half. One half, the king, lunged at the other half, the slave, and they annihilated each other in a blast of pure metaphysical contradiction. The path was clear. The nexus lay before them. It was not a place but a memory. The memory of Block Z just before Kine's arrival. In the center of the psychic space stood the Aegis cell, its containment fields humming. And inside, at a single console, was the ghost in the machine, Cable Jones. He looked exactly as Leo remembered him, a grizzled old man in a greasy maintenance uniform. He turned as Leo and the somnambulist approached, his face weary, his eyes holding the wisdom of a man who had been trapped in a digital hell for years. Took you long enough, Cable's thought voice projected. It was a gruff, no-nonsense sound, like his speaking voice. I've been holding this thing's core logic in a diagnostic loop for what feels like a lifetime. I can't hold it much longer. The big boss is starting to learn how to edit its own source code. You're the failsafe, Leo projected. Cable replied, the real one. The warden's little apocalypse button was just a noisemaker. This place. It was designed to study these things, not just hold them. The Aegis cell isn't just a cage, it's a data port. I was the firewall. When they brought Subject Zero in, it tried to eat the whole system, but it choked on me. I've been giving it digital indigestion ever since. He pointed a spectral, calloused finger at Leo. But that connection you've got, that's new. It's using you as a bridge to bypass my firewalls. It's learning through you. We have to shut that bridge down, and there's only one way to do it. How? Leo asked. Cable's expression turned grim. The Aegis cell has a manual override, a kill switch, not for the power but for the data stream. It will sever any and all psychic and metaphysical connections to anything inside the cell. It will isolate kind completely. It will cut it off from its body, from its army, from you. It will be just a mind trapped in a box, the somnambulist added, powerless. But the kill switch isn't here in the mindscape, Cable said. It's a physical switch. On the real Aegis cell. In the real Block Z, someone has to get down there and flip it. He looked at Leo, his ghostly eyes filled with a heavy sadness. And when they do, this whole mental world, this whole network, it's all going to collapse, including everyone in it. The somnambulist's form flickered. We will be erased when the connection is severed. The kid here too, Cable added gruffly. His consciousness is jacked into the system. When the system goes dark, so does he, permanently. The full weight of the situation settled on Leo. The solution was simple. The price was absolute. To save the prison, to save the world, someone on the outside had to get to Block Z and flip a switch. And in doing so, they would be executing him. He thought of Ham. He couldn't feel trust, but he could recognize competence. He knew she would do it if she had to. Tell her, Leo projected, his thought cold and clear. Tell her where the switch is and what it does. Tell her she has to be the one. How do we tell her? The somnambulist asked. We are trapped in here. The amplifier, Cable said. The bridge works both ways. We can't send a novel, but we can send a single, clear image. A schematic, a location, one shot. It'll take all three of our conscious minds focused to punch it through. Leo nodded his psychic head. This was the end of the line, a cold, logical conclusion. He was a weapon, and his purpose was to be fired. He felt no fear, no sadness, only a quiet, resolute sense of purpose. They gathered their consciousnesses, the rookie, the dream walker, and the ghost in the machine. They focused their combined will on a single image, a schematic of the Aegis cell, a bright, red arrow pointing to a small, recessed panel on its underside labeled Manual Data Stream Cutoff. They poured all of their remaining energy into that one desperate message. And then, with all their might, they pushed. Chapter 13, The Last Broadcast. On the outside, in the blood-spattered, chaotic reality of the infirmary, the world was ending. The barricade at the door had been breached. The two remaining guards with Cortez were dead, their bodies torn apart by a fresh wave of horrors. It wasn't just infected guards anymore. Kine was getting creative. A creature that looked like the Weeping Woman but with limbs made of sharpened, screaming metal, slid through the breach. The greed golem, its golden form now fused with twitching flesh and sinew, lumbered behind it. Cortez was down, his leg crushed under a fallen piece of equipment, but he was still fighting, firing his rifle at the advancing monsters. Ham was a whirlwind of motion, the UV projector a cleansing beam of light in the darkness. She vaporized the metal banshee, but two more creatures, things of nightmare that defied description, crawled over the barricade to take its place. They were losing. It was over. Riggs was screaming, huddled over the console of the psychoharmonic amplifier. It's overloading. I can't hold the connection. His brain waves are flatlining. Keep it stable, Ham yelled, firing the projector again, carving a chunk out of the golem's shoulder. Give him more time. There is no more time, Riggs cried, tears streaming down her face. The machine is going to blow. She was right. The console sparked violently and smoke began to pour from its vents. The helmet on Leo's head glowed with a dangerous, white-hot intensity. His body, lying limply on the cot, began to convulse. "Pull him out," Cortez yelled from the floor. "Pull the plug." Ham glanced at Leo's body, then at the horde of monsters pressing into the room. Her face was a mask of grim calculus. This was it, the final, hopeless moment. Then it happened. For a single, earth-shattering second, every screen in the room, including the main console of the amplifier, flashed with a single, clear image. It was a perfect schematic of the Aegis cell in Block Z. A bright red arrow pointed to a specific panel on its underside. Below it, stark white letters spelled out the words, "Manual data stream cutoff." The image held for a second, a moment of perfect clarity in the chaos. Then the amplifier exploded. The resulting blast threw Riggs across the room. The helmet on Leo's head shattered, and his body went limp, smoke rising from his hair. The lights in the infirmary, and indeed the entire level, went out completely, plunging them into a darkness deeper than before. The psychic connection, the bridge, was destroyed. And in the darkness, the monsters stopped. They froze mid-lunge, their glowing green eyes dimming, their aggressive postures slackening. The deep, thrumming heartbeat of the prison faltered, becoming erratic like a dying heart. The attack had been so focused, so directed, that the sudden loss of their commander-in-chief, however temporary, had thrown the entire army into disarray. They were still dangerous, but they were no longer a coordinated force. They were just puppets with their strings cut. Ham stood in the ringing silence, her mind processing the image she had seen. A kill switch, a way to sever the connection, a final, desperate move. She knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that the message had come from Leo. It was his last act, his last broadcast. "Riggs, Cortez, are you alive?" she called out into the darkness. A weak moan came from Riggs. A string of curses came from Cortez. They were alive. "We're going to Block Z," Ham announced, her voice ringing with a renewed, terrible purpose. "We're finishing this." "Lena, you're insane," Cortez grunted, trying to pull himself free. "We can't even get out of this room." As if to punctuate his point, one of the frozen monsters, a thing with too many joints, began to twitch, its green eyes flickering back to life as Kine's consciousness began to reassert its fractured control. But before it could move, the walls of the infirmary began to shake, not with the rhythmic pulse of Kine, but with a new, violent tremor. A section of the ceiling collapsed, raining dust and concrete down on them. A deep, grinding roar echoed from the levels below. It was the sound of the Oracle's revolution. He and his followers were fighting their way upward, a wave of chaotic destruction that was tearing the prison apart from the inside out. They weren't just fighting Kine's forces. They were fighting the prison itself, bringing the whole rotten structure down around them. A new figure appeared in the shattered doorway of the infirmary. It was Xylos, the Leshy. The wooden giant was heavily damaged, one of its arms torn away, its body covered in deep, festering wounds. But its eyes still burned with a cold, determined light. Behind it was Fenrir Magnar, his body covered in blood, some of it his, most of it not. "The path is clear," Xylos rasped, its voice weak. "The madman of rust has drawn the master's attention. We have a window." Ham nodded. "Get Cortez. Riggs, can you walk?" The young guard stumbled to her feet, clutching her arm. "I think so." "Good." Ham strode over to the cot where Leo's body lay. His face was peaceful. Whatever horrors he had witnessed in the mind of the god, they were over now. There was a faint burn mark on his temple where the machine had overloaded. She looked at him for a moment, a flicker of the old, human Lena showing in her eyes. She felt a pang of loss for the scared, idealistic rookie he had been. Then she hardened her expression, turned away, and became the commander again. There was no time for grief. The journey to Block Z was a mad dash through a war zone. The prison was tearing itself apart. The forces of Kind's organic order fought a losing battle against the Oracle's chaotic decay. Corridors collapsed, entire levels gave way, and the screams of dying monsters, both flesh and metal, echoed through the halls. Ham's small, desperate band, the soldier, the tech, the wounded veteran, the dying nature spirit, and the berserker werewolf, ran through the heart of the chaos, their goal a single point in the lowest level of hell. They reached the white corridor leading to the Aegis cell. It was miraculously intact, a bubble of calm in the raging storm. The Iris door was sealed. "Riggs, get it open," Ham commanded. Riggs, her hands shaking, plugged a bypass tool into the control panel. "I'm trying. The security protocols are fighting me, but they're weak, disorganized." As she worked, Fenrir and Xylos stood guard, watching their backs. The sounds of the battle were getting closer. "It's Gavril," Fenrir growled, his nose in the air. "He's coming, and he's not alone." "Faster, Riggs," Ham urged. With a final keystroke and a prayer, Riggs slammed her hand on the console. The Iris groaned, shuddered, and began to spiral open. The chamber beyond was a scene of cosmic horror. The obsidian sphere of the Aegis cell was no longer suspended. Two of the energy beams had snapped, and it now hung at a precarious angle, its surface covered in a web of black, reality-devouring cracks. It pulsed with a malevolent, silent power. The very air in the chamber was thin, tasting of ash and nothingness. This was the source, the heart of the god. "The panel," Ham said, pointing to the underside of the sphere exactly where the schematic had shown it. "It has to be there." But their path was blocked. Gavril stood before the sphere, his burnt arm already healed, his face a mask of cold fury. He was flanked by the last of his personal guard, the two Gorgon sisters, their single, shared eye glowing with a terrible light, and the piper, who held a flute carved from a human femur to his lips. "So the mice have reached the pantry," Gavril said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Did you truly think I would let you spoil the master's feast?" The piper began to play. It was not the song of loyalty, but a terrible, high-pitched melody of pure pain, a sound designed to shred the nerves and shatter bone. Ham and her team cried out, clutching their heads as the sound burrowed into their skulls. But Xylos did not have nerves of flesh. The Leshy strode forward, ignoring the painful music, its great wooden hands balled into fists. Your song is wind in dead trees. It has no power over me. It slammed into the Gorgon sisters, its immense strength sending them reeling. The piper's music faltered as he was forced to dodge the Leshy's sweeping attack. Fenrir, letting out a final, savage howl, leaped at Gavril. It was the battle he had craved, the alpha predator of the old world against the chosen avatar of the new one. They met in a blur of claws and fangs and impossible speed. Now, Ham yelled, grabbing Riggs and Cortez and pulling them toward the sphere while the monsters fought. Cover me. They ran under the titanic battle, the air filled with the sounds of Gavril's furious snarls and Fenrir's savage howls. They reached the base of the lurching obsidian sphere. Ham looked up. The panel was there, just as the image had shown. A small, recessed square of metal. She reached for it, her fingers brushing against the cold, smooth surface. A searing pain shot through her arm. She looked down and saw a deep gash, the flesh around it turning to gray stone. One of the Gorgons had recovered, its terrible eye fixing on her. She stumbled back, dropping to one knee, the petrification spreading rapidly up her arm. It was over. She had failed at the last possible second. But then Riggs was there. The young, terrified tech who had been shaking and crying for hours looked at Ham's stone-gray arm, then at the panel, then at the raging battle. A look of pure, desperate resolve came over her face. "For Leo," she whispered. Before Ham could stop her, Riggs lunged forward and slammed her hand against the panel. It clicked inward, and a small, simple, old-fashioned toggle switch was revealed. Riggs didn't hesitate. She flipped the switch. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the universe screamed. A wave of pure, silent anti-energy erupted from the Aegis cell. It was not a wave of force, but of pure disconnection. The data stream was severed. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. Gavril, who had just thrown Fenrir across the room, froze. The divine power that had animated him, the connection to Kine, was gone. He was just a vampire again, ancient and powerful, but no longer a god's avatar. He looked down at his hands in confusion, a look of profound loss on his face. The Gorgon sisters shrieked as the power that held their shared consciousness together dissolved. They collapsed, their single eye rolling to the back of its socket. The piper dropped his flute, the music gone. The thrumming heartbeat of the prison stopped. The fleshy, organic walls began to wither and blacken, crumbling into dust. The glowing sigils faded into nothingness. Kine's body was dying. Its consciousness, now trapped, isolated, and utterly powerless within the obsidian sphere, was cut off from its creation. It was just a mind in a box once more. The prison began to collapse in earnest. The Oracle's entropic revolution and Kine's sudden death combining to bring the entire structure down. The ceiling cracked, and sunlight, real, actual sunlight, streamed into the chamber for the first time in decades. Fenrir, back on his feet and no longer having to fight a god, lunged at the now-depowered Gavril. The vampire, his face a mask of dawning horror at his own mortality, tried to fight back, but it was over. The wolf's jaws closed on his throat, and the ancient predator's story ended in a spray of black blood. "We have to go," Ham yelled, her voice hoarse. The petrification on her arm had stopped spreading, leaving her with a useless stone limb. She grabbed Riggs with her good hand and pulled her toward the collapsed ceiling, toward the sunlight. Cortez was crawling behind them. Xylos, its duty done, sat down heavily against a wall, its wooden body beginning to crumble into sawdust, its single glowing eye dimming with a final, weary peace. It had found its final rest. Ham, Riggs, and Cortez stumbled out of the ruins of O77P8 into the blinding light of the setting sun. They were battered, broken, and irrevocably scarred. They were the only survivors. Behind them, the prison, the brutalist tomb of horrors, collapsed into a crater of dust and rubble, burying its secrets, its monsters, and its heroes forever. They stood there for a long time, three survivors on the edge of a crater, the setting sun casting their long shadows across the barren plains. They had won. The world was safe. Ham looked at her stone hand, then at the crater where Leo's body was now buried. The cost had been absolute. She felt a profound sense of loss, a grief so deep it was a physical weight. It was a feeling Leo, in his final moments, would not have been able to comprehend. It was the price of being human, and it was a price she would carry for the rest of her life. Chapter 14. Epilogue: The Price of Silence. The sun had barely crested the horizon when the helicopters came. They were sleek, black, and utterly silent, descending on the cratered landscape like carrion birds. Men in sterile white hazmat suits, armed with instruments that hummed and clicked, swarmed the perimeter, establishing a quarantine zone. They were followed by soldiers in unmarked gray combat gear, their faces hidden behind reflective visors. They were not a rescue team. They were a cleanup crew. Ham, Riggs, and Cortez were found huddled together, sharing the last of a water bottle from a guard's utility belt. They were immediately separated and led to different medical tents. Ham's stone arm was an object of intense interest, scanned and sampled by men who spoke in hushed, clinical tones. She offered no resistance. She was too tired to fight anymore. Days later, in a sterile, windowless room in a facility she did not recognize, a man in an expensive suit sat across from her. He was not a soldier or a scientist. He was a manager of disasters, a man whose job it was to erase history. A catastrophic failure of a deep Earth experimental geothermal reactor, the man said, his voice smooth and utterly devoid of emotion. He pushed a file across the table. It was thick, filled with falsified geological surveys, doctored seismic readings, and fabricated technical schematics. The resulting explosion caused an unprecedented geological event, creating the sinkhole that swallowed the O77P8 Correctional and Research Facility. All hands were lost. A tragedy. He looked at her, his eyes cold and empty. That is the story. You will learn it, you will live it. There is no other version. And Leo Jansen, Ham asked, her voice a dry rasp. And the others? They are listed among the deceased, the man replied without hesitation. Heroes who died trying to prevent a reactor meltdown. Their families will receive generous compensation and a neatly folded flag. They will never know the truth. The truth, Officer Hom, is not something the world is equipped to handle. What about us? She asked, looking down at her gray, useless stone hand. You, Officer Cortez, and Technician Riggs officially died in that facility as well, the man said. The people you were are gone. In their place, new people will be born with new names, new histories, and a pension that will ensure your silence. Mr. Cortez has already accepted. He wishes to retire to a quiet life by the sea. Ms. Riggs has been given a new identity and a research position at a private institution where her unique experience can be studied under controlled conditions. She just wants to forget. He leaned forward. But you, Lena, you are different. You are a survivor. You have seen the abyss and spat in its eye. People like you are a rare and valuable resource. We have a place for people like you. He slid another file across the table. It was thin. It contained a single sheet of paper with a new name and a list of targets. They were names of escaped entities from other, lesser breaches, fugitive monsters living in the shadows of the human world. We're offering you a new job, the man said. The world is full of cracks. We need people who aren't afraid to hunt in the dark. Hom looked at the file, then at her stone hand. He was offering her a cage of a different kind, not of concrete but of purpose. A perpetual war against the things she now knew were real. She thought of Leo. She thought of the silence where his voice should be. She picked up the file. 1 year later. The night was cold in Budapest. Rain slicked the cobblestone streets, reflecting the neon signs of seedy bars and forgotten shops. A woman sat in a darkened car, her gaze fixed on a small, unassuming pawn shop across the street. Her left hand, a thing of mottled gray stone, rested on the passenger seat. Her right hand held a compact, high-energy device that hummed with a quiet, deadly power. She was no longer Lena Hom. She was a ghost, a hunter, a necessary monster. The name in her file was irrelevant. Her purpose was all that mattered. Miles away, in a small, quiet house on a coastline where the fog never quite lifted, a man with a heavy limp and a lifetime of scars in his eyes watched the waves roll in. He never spoke of the prison. He never spoke of the things he had seen. He just sat and watched and waited for an end that had already come for everyone else he knew. And in a sterile, isolated laboratory surrounded by miles of forest, a young woman with haunted eyes stared at lines of code on a screen. She built firewalls. She created digital cages. She spent her days trying to build a system that could not be broken, her nights trying to forget the feeling of a god's mind collapsing, and a good man's life being used as the final, desperate key. The world was safe. The price had been paid, and the receipt was written in the silence of the dead and the shattered lives of the few who had survived. The story of O77P8 was over, buried under a mountain of concrete and official lies. In a dusty antique shop in a city that had forgotten its own name, a young man, a collector of rare and unusual things, ran a hand over a small, ornate brass flask he had just acquired from a mysterious estate sale. It was beautiful, its surface cool to the touch, covered in mesmerizing patterns. He felt a strange connection to it, a sense of immense history and contained power. He smiled, pleased with his new acquisition. He was alone in the shop, the door locked for the night. He wondered what secrets the flask held. He picked it up. The moment his skin made contact, a smooth, melodious voice echoed not in the shop, but directly in the center of his mind. "Ah," said the voice of the collector, filled with an ancient, patient amusement. "A new customer. Welcome. Tell me, what is it you desire most in this world?" The end.